Magdalena Aguilar Romero, a vibrant young woman with great potential, repeatedly sought help to protect herself from her abusive ex-husband. Despite her persistent pleas for safety, she received no response. Magdalena, also known as Magda Aguilar Romero, later took on the last name Arciniega after her marriage. She was born on November 18, 1990, in Tasca de Alarcón, a mining town in Guerrero, southwestern Mexico. As the youngest of 3 siblings and the only daughter of their family, she was raised in a challenging environment. Her father worked in a local silver mine, which was a demanding and hazardous job. Despite the health and safety risks, his work provided a steady income to support their large family. Her mother was a stay-at-home mom who focused on raising her 3 children and managing the household. With her husband's reliable income, the family always had what they needed. While they weren't rich, they lived in a spacious and comfortable home. Their sons and Magdalena went to good schools. They participated in sports and other activities. By the mid-1990s, they bought their first car. Magdalena's parents and older brothers cherished, pampered her. She was smart, kind, and sociable. She excelled in school. In middle school, she developed a strong interest in biology and anatomy. Initially, Magdalena aspired to become a cardiologist, but in high school, her focus shifted to nutrition, healthy eating, and wellness. She decided to pursue a career in this area to help people facing health issues related to their diet and eating habits. When Magdalena told her family about her plans, they fully supported her. As a dedicated student, she easily gained admission to a top university to study nutrition. She was determined to become an expert in her field. Instead of moving into the dorms, Magdalena chose to live at home with her family, commuting to university by bus, despite the nearly hour-long journey each way. She still managed to keep up with her sports activities and attended dance classes. Her intense focus on her studies left little time for a personal life, but everything changed in 2011. That year, 20-year-old Magdalena met 35-year-old Cesar Gomez Arciniega, who also hailed from Tasca de Alarcón. Cesar owned a successful bar that was a beloved spot in the neighborhood. Locals frequented it to relax after work, share stories, enjoy delicious food, and drink what many considered the best beer in town. Initially, Magdalena ignored the advances and romantic gestures from the older man, Cesar. However, he was persistent. He proved to be intelligent, well-read, and genuinely engaging. He wooed her with poetry, flowers, meaningful gifts. Eventually, she found him charming, succumbed to his attention. Their relationship progressed rapidly. At first, Cesar appeared reliable and mature, someone she could envision a future with. Shortly after they started dating, Magdalena found out she was pregnant. This news shocked her, but Cesar was thrilled. He promptly expressed his desire to marry her. Magdalena agreed to his proposal. Both her family and Cesar's relatives supported the marriage, with no objections or obstacles to their union. In 2011, they officially tied the knot in a simple ceremony at a local chapel, attended by only close relatives and a few friends. After the wedding, Magdalena moved into Cesar's home, which was located in the same building as his bar. At that time, she was in her 3rd year of college, but with a baby on the way and the responsibilities of being a newlywed, she chose to pause her studies to focus on her expanding family. Cesar supported this decision. He was thrilled to have his young wife close by. With a steady income from the family business, Magdalena didn't have to work and had everything she needed. She adjusted to domestic life. Soon they welcomed their first son. Less than a year later, Magdalena discovered she was expecting again. In the summer of 2013, she gave birth to their second son. Things began to change in early 2014 when Magdalena decided to go back to school to complete her degree. This decision led to strong opposition from her husband, Cesar, who insisted she should wait a few more years. He argued that their young sons needed their mother at home full-time. However, Magdalena was eager to return to her studies, especially since her parents were willing to help take care of the boys. They fully supported her ambition to finish her education. Magdalena quickly adjusted to being a student again, but Cesar reacted negatively. He became increasingly jealous and controlling, wanting to know her whereabouts at all times and often starting arguments over minor issues. Initially, Magdalena thought his behavior would improve, but instead, it only escalated. Cesar had developed an overwhelming need to control everything during their nearly 3.5 years of marriage. Under the pretense of acting in her best interests, he gradually isolated Magdalena from her friends and family. Their marriage occurred just a few months after they met when she was already pregnant, leaving her with little time or energy to socialize. After the births of their 2 sons in quick succession, she became even more detached from the outside world. Now that she had returned to school, Magdalena was beginning to rebuild her social life. She reconnected with old friends, made new ones, and started visiting her parents regularly, who were excited to spend time with their grandsons. Cesar began to check Magdalena's phone every day, monitor her social media accounts, and watch her closely. His jealousy intensified, leading him to become unjustly suspicious and accuse her of things she had never done. He forbade her from wearing makeup or perfume, wouldn't allow her to wear heels, even started choosing her clothes for her. To avoid fights, Magdalena reluctantly accepted his demands, but that wasn't enough for Cesar. Eventually, he issued an ultimatum: she could no longer go to college. However, Magdalena was determined not to give up on her dreams of becoming a certified nutritionist, especially when she had just over a year left until graduation. This situation turned her life into a daily struggle, as Cesar continued to impose new restrictions and rules to control her actions. By spring 2014, after ongoing pressure and emotional manipulation, Magdalena had to pause her education again. Influenced by him, she stopped communicating with her friends, even her relatives. She rarely left her house and completely stopped visiting her parents. Her parents grew suspicious when Magdalena missed a family celebration, something she had always attended. Her excuse was vague: she said she was swamped with housework. A month later, she also missed her grandmother's birthday and her parents' wedding anniversary. During phone calls with her mother, Magdalena seemed distant. She gave short answers, avoided direct questions, as if someone was listening nearby. Once lively, cheerful, she had become withdrawn. She stopped allowing family visits and made excuses whenever someone wanted to come over. One day, her older brother visited unexpectedly and was shocked by what he saw. Magdalena looked completely different. She had lost significant weight, seemed fearful and exhausted. She neglected her own well-being, flinched at the smallest noises. It turned out that Cesar had been taking her phone away and only let her make calls when he was around. He had broken her spirit, even started showing aggression in front of their young sons. Despite this, when her older brother offered to take them back to their parents' home, Magdalena refused. She insisted that she would manage on her own. Her brother couldn't remain silent about what he had witnessed. He informed their parents everything, and together they began discussing how to help Magdalena. However, they struggled to communicate with her freely because Cesar was always nearby. He treated her like property, someone he could control entirely, and he had no intention of letting her go. In August 2014, after yet another episode of aggression, Magdalena reached her breaking point. Once Cesar left to run an errand, she discreetly contacted her brother, asked for his help to escape. She quickly packed only essential items and documents, gathered her children, and sneaked out through the back door to avoid running into Cesar's mother, who lived with them. Despite witnessing the abuse, her mother-in-law had always supported her son. The brother took Magdalena and the boys to their parents' house. As expected, Cesar became very angry when he learned that his wife had left with their children. He went to his in-laws' home, demanding Magdalena return, but her father and brothers prevented him from entering, threatened to call the police if he didn't leave right away. The next few months were like a nightmare for Magdalena and her sons. They only left the house when accompanied by her father or brothers because they were afraid Cesar might try to kidnap them. Magdalena reached out to the local authorities for protection from her partner's harassment, but the police did not consider her situation to be a serious threat and denied her request for help. A month after moving out, Magdalena decided to file for divorce. At that point, Cesar changed his approach. He started apologizing and begging her to return, insisting he had changed and would never harm her again, while expressing his love for her. However, Magdalena didn't believe him. She knew him well enough to see that he was just trying to manipulate her again. For a while, he attempted to persuade her to come back, but when he realized she was not going to return, he resorted to threats, emotional pressure. Magdalena often felt anxious, constantly checking her surroundings in fear that he might appear unexpectedly. She visited the police twice more in hopes of obtaining a restraining order against Cesar, but both times her requests were denied. The officers insisted that she was not in any real danger. By early 2015, their divorce was finalized. The court decided that their sons would live with their mother while their father would have visitation rights, including weekends and holidays. At that point, Cesar seemed to have calmed down. He stopped reaching out to his ex-wife and appeared to be moving on with his life. This change allowed Magdalena to finally relax. She returned to college, earned her degree, soon found a good job at a private clinic in her field. Surrounded by friends and family, she began to thrive, earning a stable income and making plans for her future. Nearly 3 years had gone by since the divorce. Cesar no longer attempted to interfere in Magdalena's life. He adhered to the set schedule for picking up and dropping off the boys. Sometimes, Magdalena would go to his house to collect them, but she never went by herself. Her father or one of her brothers always accompanied her. Although Cesar tried to be friendly, Magdalena never felt completely safe around him. Deep down, she knew she could never trust him again. The years she spent living with him, filled with emotional and physical abuse, had left a lasting impact. On January 13, 2018, the boys were with their father. The Romero family was supposed to attend a memorial service at a local church for a recently deceased relative that day. Magdalena informed her mother that she would be late because Cesar, the boys' father, had refused to take them to the church. She arranged to pick them up herself and agreed to meet Cesar at a park near his house. After waiting for about 30 minutes, Cesar called to inform her that he had a sudden errand and had left the boys with his mother, who was unwell and unable to bring them to the park. With no other option, Magdalena decided to go directly to her former mother-in-law's house. While on her way, she called her mother to explain the situation and assured her she would arrive at the church within 30 minutes with the boys. That was the last time her mother heard from her daughter. Magdalena never arrived at the church. Her phone first went unanswered and then was turned off completely. Concerned about Magdalena, her parents started contacting her friends, but no one had seen her. Trying to reach Cesar also yielded no results. That night, filled with increasing worry, the Romeros went to the police to report Magdalena as missing. However, the officers did not take their concerns seriously. They pointed out that Magdalena was an adult and not required to check in regularly, adding that it had only been a few hours since anyone had last heard from her. The following day, the police again declined to start a formal search for the same reasons. Magdalena's parents took action, reaching out to everyone they knew for help. They quickly informed relatives and friends, who joined the search for her. News of Magdalena's disappearance spread rapidly on social media, with many sharing her and her son's photos, urging anyone with information to speak up. Flyers were put up throughout the town and on utility poles. When her parents visited Cesar's house, he refused to let them in. He expressed worry about Magdalena and the boys being missing, but he falsely claimed she had taken them and mentioned visiting someone. In reality, Magdalena had told her mother she was going to pick up the boys from Cesar's house to take them to church. The Romeros soon realized something was wrong and suspected that Cesar was not telling the truth. They approached the police again, but the authorities still would not open a missing persons case. They also refused to question Cesar or search his home, claiming there was no reason to do so. Feeling hopeless, Magdalena's parents kept searching on their own for over a week. As their fear and frustration increased, they began to organize public demonstrations to raise awareness about the case and pressure the authorities to act. Eventually, these efforts started to yield results. A neighbor of Cesar contacted the police to report that the boys were at their father's house. Other witnesses later stated they had seen Magdalena entering Cesar's home on the day she disappeared, but no one saw her leave. The public outcry from the Romero family eventually compelled law enforcement to take action. On January 22, 2018, a search warrant was issued for Cesar's residence. What investigators found inside was shocking. The police said that Romero's legs and arms were found inside a pot on the stove, while her cooked pelvis was discovered in a bag near the stove. The rest of her body was found in a nearby refrigerator. Cesar and his mother were caught off guard by the arrival of the police and had not cleaned the area beforehand. The officers brought in Magdalena's parents to identify her remains. The state of her body was distressing, but her parents quickly recognized their daughter. The shock was overwhelming for her mother, and she needed immediate medical help. A forensic examination revealed that Magdalena had suffered severe beatings before her death, which was caused by mechanical asphyxiation. She had been strangled. The most distressing detail that came to light later was that their sons, only 6 and 4.5 years old at the time, had been inside the house throughout the entire incident and witnessed everything. The violent attack on their mother occurred right in front of them. Sadly, they became important witnesses in the subsequent court case. Even though they were young and didn't fully understand what had happened, the older son later told investigators that he saw his father hitting and choking his mother as she screamed, tried to escape. He remembered how Cesar dragged her into the kitchen while their grandmother tried to keep the boys from coming in. The older boy disobeyed and peeked inside, only to see something terrifying. Cesar quickly became the main suspect. However, when the police arrived, they only found his mother and the boys at the house. Cesar had somehow escaped just hours before the search, almost as if he knew the authorities were coming. He took as much cash as he could and disappeared. That same day, his mother was arrested and taken to jail to await trial. She remained calm, even indifferent, when confronted by the police. She did not deny her role in the incidents involving her former daughter-in-law and showed no signs of remorse. Cesar's mother had always been aware of how her son treated his wife, but she consistently sided with Cesar. The investigation showed that while she didn't directly commit the crime, she was aware of her son's plans. She helped bring Magdalena to their home and concealing the evidence. Detectives were particularly disturbed by one aspect of the case: some body parts were cooked into a thick stew. Cesar's mother could not provide a clear explanation for these actions. During the trial, Magdalena's sons testified against Cesar's mothers, as they had witnessed the traumatic events involving their mother. The older boy had sneaked into the kitchen and saw hands boiling in a pot, along with his mother's head in the freezer. The trauma from these experiences was profound, requiring extensive therapy for the boys to start healing and to overcome their nightmares. In November 2019, the court found Cesar's mother guilty of concealment of evidence. Throughout the proceedings, she never expressed any remorse for her actions. The main suspect, Cesar, was the focus of a nationwide manhunt, but authorities could not locate him right after the incident. His mother said she did not know where he had gone. Despite significant media attention, public protests calling for justice, and extensive searches, Cesar remained missing. Authorities searched for him for over 4 years, both in Mexico and internationally, even enlisting Interpol's help, but all leads eventually went cold. In early July 2022, an unexpected incident occurred in Tijuana, a border city, when a bar fight broke out between 2 drunk patrons. The police arrested both men, one of whom was identified as Massimo Herrera Garcia. However, once at the police station, fingerprint analysis revealed he was actually Cesar Gomez Arciniega, a wanted fugitive who had been living under a false identity to escape capture. His intoxicated and aggressive behavior led to his arrest. After being identified, he was sent back to his hometown to await trial. He stalled the legal process by frequently changing attorneys, delaying the trial until fall 2023. By that time, Magdalena's sons had grown older and could better articulate their experiences. They testified against their father. In November 2023, Cesar was convicted of the premeditated and brutal murder of his ex-wife. The court deemed the crime as gender-based, recognizing that it stemmed from years of accumulated desire for revenge after their divorce. He received a sentence of 55 years in prison without the chance for parole. Magdalena's sons were then placed in the care of their maternal grandparents, who had worked tirelessly to seek justice for their mother. On February 14, 2023, in Lincoln County, Oklahoma, a 15-year-old named Colin Griffith called 911. He reported that his father, Charles Robert Griffith, was dead. Officers arrived and found Charles with no signs of life. He had been shot in the head, chest, and had bled out before the doctors could help. According to Colin, another conflict had occurred between them, which was a frequent occurrence in their family, but this time, everything escalated. Charles had cornered his son with a knife, forcing Colin to defend his life. In the heat of the struggle, Colin shot his father and claimed it was an act of self-defense. Colin was immediately detained and taken to the police station for further investigation. He remained surprisingly calm and explained his version of the events in detail. Initially, his account seemed convincing, and he was released. However, as the investigation continued, more evidence emerged that contradicted Colin's statements. He was called in for questioning again to clarify the discrepancies in his story. During this second interview, the detectives expressed their disbelief, and Colin subsequently refused to cooperate, demanding a lawyer. He was then arrested, with a bail set at $50,000. His mother, Catherine, paid the bail immediately, allowing him to return home. Catherine revealed that she had divorced Charles long before and that there had been a prolonged custody battle. Colin had moved in with his father in 2019, 4 years before the tragic incident, which had become a significant problem. Charles had prevented any communication between mother and son, allowing only occasional phone calls. During one of these calls, Colin informed Catherine that his father had forbidden him from attending school, isolating him within their home and subjecting him to constant pressure. Colin stated that he had been trapped in his father's house for the last 4 years and was not even allowed to eat more than once a day. Detectives reviewed documents related to Catherine and Charles's lengthy divorce proceedings. Throughout their marriage, Charles had continually abused Catherine, who had reported him to the police multiple times, but the authorities had not taken action. After the divorce, Catherine lost her ability to see Colin. In August of the divorce year, Catherine sought sole custody since Charles impeded all contact between her and Colin. Colin reported that his father continually denigrated Catherine. As the investigation progressed, Charles claimed that he had severed communication between mother and son after Catherine threatened to commit her own life, painting her as dependent on alcohol and banned substance. He justified restricting contact as necessary for Colin's well-being. Charles even presented evidence that Catherine attempted to pose as someone else on Discord to chat with Colin and urged him to escape from his father's home. Despite substantial evidence of abuse by Charles, Colin was charged with first-degree murder. About a month later, prosecutors announced they could not gather enough convincing evidence for the teenager's guilt regarding the intentional murder of Charles. It appeared that Colin acted in self-defense while fleeing from his dangerous and unstable father. In March 2023, Colin was acquitted and returned to his mother's custody, placed under house arrest, and required to wear a tracking device. After their long-awaited reunion, Catherine began posting on social media to share these moments, including photographs related to Charles, culminating in an image of his grave. While she expressed relief in ending her relationship with Charles, she lamented that she hadn't done so sooner. As Colin gradually began to recover from his psychological trauma and reintegrate into society, about 7 months had passed since the tragic events. However, the sheriff's office received a call to check on the Griffith household. An officer arrived to find a visibly agitated Colin, who claimed that his mother had taken a gun, threatened to kill him, and then handed him the weapon, urging him to shoot her. This raised concerns about Catherine's mental health. When questioned, she insisted that Colin was lying, asserting that he was upset because she had confiscated his phone and headphones due to his poor school performance. Catherine expressed concern that Colin might be suffering from a severe form of post-traumatic stress disorder. This stress was a result of the circumstances surrounding the murder of his father, leading to unstable behavior during this period. In Florida, the so-called Baker Act was in effect, which mandated that individuals suspected of serious mental disorders be involuntarily placed in medical institutions for appropriate assistance. Under this law, detention in a clinic is required for 72 hours to establish a diagnosis. During this period, examinations are conducted to determine whether the patient requires longer and more serious treatment in isolation from society. Colin was placed in the appropriate facility under this law, where the staff heard him threaten violence, insisting that if he was sent home, he would either take his own life or kill his mother. Detectives spoke with Catherine, who stated that throughout the time her son lived with her, he had been visiting a psychotherapist. When the detectives spoke to the specialist, it became evident that Colin had threatened them if he received a serious diagnosis that would result in his being placed in a clinic. Consequently, instead of addressing the real issues he was experiencing, the psychotherapist noted only minor disorders, for which mild sedatives were prescribed. After this revelation, it was decided to keep Colin under psychiatric supervision for an additional 5 days, as the staff of the institution deemed him too dangerous to be released. A week later, Colin was returned to his mother. During the car ride, he stated again that he would kill himself or his mother if he were near her again, repeating that he had already killed his father and would do it again without hesitation. Catherine was frightened and began searching for a more suitable clinic that could accept Colin for long-term treatment. Unfortunately, similar clinics in Florida were overcrowded, which caused delays. Despite these challenges, Catherine managed to find an appropriate psychiatric clinic in Florida that could accommodate her son for the following months. However, the day when he was supposed to return to his mother was inexorably approaching. 2 months had passed, and in November, 15-year-old Colin returned home. 2 days later, emergency services received a 911 call from his maternal grandmother, Susan Detman. She reported that during a joint lunch, Colin had suddenly stood up, pulled his mother by the hair, and hit her in the groin. When she fell to the floor, he began to kick her. Upon the police's arrival, Colin again insisted that it was self-defense, as in the case with his father. However, his grandmother disagreed. She recounted witnessing her grandson's aggression, stating that he had initiated the attack on his mother. Colin was arrested for domestic violence but was soon released again. Once more, he threatened to take his own life or kill his mother right at the police station. It seemed that he did not want to go back to his mother because he did not feel safe with her. Colin described his life with her as a struggle between the desire to escape and the need to defend himself. Nevertheless, in February 2024, they began living together again, although a special prohibition order was issued to limit Colin's contact with Catherine in the house. This was similar to a restraining order but was designed to manage potentially dangerous individuals living in close quarters. Its effectiveness in such a confined space is hard to determine. On February 14, 2024, Colin went to his grandmother's house, but he was quickly located and was about to be returned to his mother. In May of that same year, they were reunited after he had spent another period of forced detention in a psychiatric hospital. During this time, Colin graduated from high school and was planning to continue his education in college. To aid his transition, his mother gifted him a brand new Volkswagen car worth $26,000. On her social media, numerous photos appeared showing her enjoying happy trips with her son to different places. Unfortunately, in reality, all of this was merely a facade, as the situation within the family was far from ideal. On September 8, 2024, 17-year-old Colin Griffith contacted the city police station once again, stating that he had a fight with his mother at his grandmother's house. Catherine had attacked him with a knife. They fought for a long time, and Catherine accidentally fell on the bladed weapon herself, resulting in a serious wound to her neck. On that fateful day, Colin was at his grandmother's house. When the sheriff's deputies arrived, they found him covered in blood, but he behaved very calmly and restrained. He recounted the story of self-defense and claimed that he was not guilty of his mother's death. Interestingly, several neighbors who lived nearby reported that they had become involuntary witnesses to Colin's inappropriate behavior. Colin had come to his grandmother's house a few days before these events, with his mother arriving later. Colin quarreled with his mother almost all day, and everyone in the area heard their arguments. About half an hour before the alleged murder, Neighbors saw him dragging his mother by the hair and pulling her inside his grandmother's house. Catherine cried in pain and begged him to let her go, but she was unable to escape from her aggressive son. In the days leading up to these events, Colin had quarreled with his mother over chores around the house, which he had refused to do. Catherine complained to several friends and relatives on social media about Colin's behavior, expressing her concerns. In the days leading up to her death, Catherine had been actively communicating with friends. She frequently discussed Colin's behavior, describing him as uncontrollable and dangerous. She did not want to bring him back home from her mother's house. Catherine expressed feeling exhausted and tired of his antics, fearing for her safety and life. During that time, the grandmother was away and could not witness the events firsthand. However, it is possible that her absence saved her life. Colin lived peacefully in grandmother's house alone for 2 days until his mother arrived. Shortly before the grandmother's return, the house was filled with forensic experts who began an active investigation into all the circumstances surrounding the incident. They managed to find the alleged murder weapon, which turned out to be a bloody kitchen knife. The grandmother was initially convinced that her grandson was guilty of what had happened. However, she later radically changed her mind. The prosecutor's office believed that Colin was lying. They wished to try him as an adult and impose a lengthy prison sentence in order to protect the public from a potentially dangerous individual. The forensic expert identified a deep, penetrating wound in Catherine's neck. However, this did not correspond with an accidental injury. According to the expert's conclusion, the blow was delivered with such force that it was impossible for her to have accidentally fallen onto the knife. The nature of her death led to the consideration of premeditated murder. After this discovery, Oklahoma detectives also questioned whether Colin's actions had been classified correctly in relation to his father. One of Catherine's ex-boyfriends, a man named Robert, posted a video within 24 hours of her murder. In it, he discussed his experiences with her and Colin. He noted that Colin was well trained in self-defense despite his young age. Colin was proficient in using cold weapons and had hand-to-hand combat skills, which he claimed were taught to him by his father while he was alive. Robert also learned about Colin's many mental disorders and believed this was a legacy from his father. He described Catherine as a very complex individual but believed she would not have been capable of an armed attack on her son or of voluntarily taking her own life. The police officers in this city were well acquainted with Colin, considering his described behavior to be indicative of clinical psychopathy. Catherine was described as a loving but somewhat frivolous mother who paid with her life for her sincere feelings for her son. After these tragic events, a press conference was held, and it became apparent to the detectives that Colin showed absolutely no remorse for what had happened. He did not express regret over the loss of his closest family members. The most disturbing aspect was the cold-blooded indifference he demonstrated while communicating with the police. Police investigators spoke with the grandmother, who confirmed that her daughter had been complaining for about a year, since Charles's murder, about how Colin had been inflicting real emotional terror on her. Both women were simply afraid to be around him and did not feel safe. The grandmother feared that she could easily become the next victim if nothing was done. Forensic experts examined the crime scene and identified major contradictions in Colin's account. There were no signs of a struggle inside the house, even though he insisted that he had been arguing with his mother for at least half an hour. It appeared as though he had simply taken a knife and stabbed her in the neck without any signs of a struggle. The aggression displayed by Colin towards his mother was corroborated by neighbors who witnessed him dragging her by the hair. No one saw Catherine attack or even threaten her son. Experts analyzing Colin's case concluded that he suffered from psychopathy. According to their observations, such individuals are capable of wearing a mask of sanity and may outwardly seem quite normal. However, deep down, they hide serious emotional deficits and mental development disorders. Such people can be mean and callous. They willingly and actively showing aggression while boldly socially dominating. They are unable to recognize fear or aggression in others and do not demonstrate these qualities themselves in any way. This is one of the dangerous traits of a psychopath, as he will easily pass a polygraph test. This has been a recurring issue in the history of crime incidents related to some of the most brutal crimes in the world. Holograph equipment reacts to the manifestation of emotions, in particular fear, which are blocked in a psychopath. In addition, they can be impulsive and inhibited. Those involved in this case, as well as in the analysis of Colin's condition, cited examples of the most notorious psychopaths who have committed terrible crimes in their lives. It was believed that Colin Griffith could repeat their path if he was not stopped in time. Against this backdrop, the chief prosecutor in Oklahoma stated that it is necessary to take a closer look at the death of Charles Griffith, as evidence of Catherine's murder suggested that both the father and mother were victims of premeditated murder. The murder of the father could have been reopened and reviewed, but there were complications. The prime suspect, Colin, had approached his defense thoroughly. It all began when Colin called 911. He used vague wording and did not even say that his mother was dead, as if he did not know this. In fact, Catherine was so injured that she bled to death within minutes. When detectives arrived at Colin's grandmother's house, they found him bloodied, yet he remained calm and composed, so much so that his demeanor astonished them. Colin Griffith was charged with the assault and first-degree murder of his mother. The prosecutor described in detail the problematic relationship between Colin and his mother, also focusing on the domestic violence that Catherine had accused her son of several months before her death. The prosecution showed recordings and digital evidence of Colin's threats to harm his mother. To refute, the defense attorney insisted that Catherine was eccentric and unpredictable, with periodic outbursts of aggression, which contributed to the events of that fateful day. Prosecution witnesses described Colin's behavior as dispassionate and cold, even including the detective who spoke with him during the first half hour after the murder. His behavior did not indicate at all that he had just lost a loved one. It is noteworthy that no signs of a struggle were found on Colin's body, despite his insistence that his mother had attacked him first. There were bruises on Catherine's stomach. Colin likely hit his mother with his knee and kicked her with his shoe. At the same time, there was a significant amount of her blood on him when the police arrived. Colin attributed these traces to an attempt to provide first aid to his mother before the paramedics arrived. The emergency services dispatcher did consult him on this issue, but it was highly questionable whether he actually assisted her. Law enforcement officers, already familiar with Colin, spoke at the trial, particularly regarding a previous case where Colin was charged with domestic violence. At that time, obvious traces of a struggle were found on Catherine's body, while Colin insisted that she had hit him first in the face, though he showed no signs of any injuries. Naturally, the young man was not believed. These same witnesses confirmed that he had threatened to harm both his mother and grandmother during his compulsory treatment. During cross-examination, Colin insisted that he did not feel safe at home and even expressed a desire to stay in the correctional facility. Several law enforcement officers who worked with him after the domestic violence incident stated that they were forced to return him to his family solely because of regulations. Many acknowledged that this could lead to serious consequences for everyone involved. Those who knew the family well described Colin as a manipulator and a cruel person. He could appear friendly and respectful to those who provided him with valuable gifts, such as his mother and grandmother. Catherine took him on trips, bought him video games, a mobile phone, and other gadgets, and even purchased him a car. However, as soon as he heard the word no or received a request for help around the house, he would change. He'd become genuinely angry and dangerous. Experts who worked with Colin in a psychiatric clinic discovered that he had two distinct personalities, which he referred to as Colin I and Colin II. The first personality merely wanted to survive. He was a downtrodden and frightened schoolboy, while the second was cruel and ready to protect the first at all costs, even to the point of killing for him. When the forensic expert who conducted the examination of the deceased spoke on behalf of the prosecution, he described in detail the wounds sustained by Catherine. The knife blade had passed through the esophagus, the trachea, and the vocal cords. Its tip protruded on the other side. The forensic expert insisted that, of all the numerous cases involving deaths from knife wounds with which he had personally worked, there was not a single instance of such a voluntary departure from life, especially with such a deep wound. The expert was certain that to inflict such a deep wound required enormous effort. Simply falling on a knife would not cause such injuries, and this all pointed to murder. Other family members expressed great anxiety regarding the relationship between Colin and Catherine. For example, the maternal grandfather had heard several times how his grandson wished for the death of both his mother and grandmother. Catherine reported that Colin had threatened them both at least 3 times. Despite these threats, Catherine continued to insist that she loved her son and wanted him to live with her at home. Interestingly, the grandfather heard Colin express a desire to cut his mother's throat so that she would bleed to death, which was very similar to the injury inflicted on Catherine, considering the force with which the knife was thrust into her throat. Colin seemed to be experiencing an attack of cruelty and hatred directed against a loved one. When the defendant's lawyer took on the case, the most valuable witness for the defense unexpectedly turned out to be Colin's grandmother, Susan. She recounted numerous instances of Catherine's dubious behavior. For example, there was an occasion when she simply forgot that her son had been visiting his grandmother. Additionally, there were several instances in which Catherine had threatened to take her own life. Susan also mentioned that Catherine got pregnant for the first time when she was only 13 years old and gave birth to Colin when she was 22. According to Susan, Catherine was quite hot-tempered and eventually stopped all contact with her family. Susan claimed that Catherine had confessed to her that Catherine used violence against Colin, hitting him with a knee, a belt, even guns, and forcing him to do push-ups. Catherine feels burdened having to wake up early in the morning to take her mentally challenged son to school. Susan insisted that Catherine should call Colin 3 times a day for the first week of his detention, but Catherine was encouraged when Colin was found guilty and sentenced to a lengthy prison term. The change in the grandmother's testimony shocked many because earlier she had insisted that she was afraid of her grandson and that he threatened them. Now, it seemed she was shifting the blame for what happened to Catherine. In fact, she appeared so ready to malign her murdered daughter that it caused significant damage to the prosecution's case. In closing arguments, the prosecution emphasized that the defendant harbored hatred for his mother. This animosity ultimately led to the charge of premeditated murder against Colin. After hearing arguments from both sides, the jury deliberated on the verdict. The defense's arguments proved effective, and when the jury returned, they delivered a verdict of not guilty, concluding that Catherine was not being held against her will and that her death was largely viewed as a voluntary departure from life. They determined that she had provoked her own son into an altercation during which she died, whether accidentally or intentionally. In the wake of these events, disputes have continued, and serious doubts have emerged regarding whether the murder of Colin's father was truly an act of self-defense. Currently, an investigation into his father's death in Oklahoma is ongoing. Some relatives believe that if Colin had not escaped justice for his father's murder and if the Oklahoma prosecutor's office had acted more decisively, he would be behind bars, and his mother would still be alive. As it stands, no one can feel safe, especially Susan, who actively supported him during the trial and to whom he has sent threats. The case of Colin Griffith is a heartbreaking tragedy, where family conflicts and deep psychological trauma led to irreversible consequences. The deaths of both Charles and Catherine not only claimed 2 lives but also left unanswered questions about the nature of Colin, a teenager caught between the lines of victim and perpetrator. Although the court's decision freed him, the haunting effects of Colin's violent actions and suspicions about his motives continue to affect his family and community. While Susan and the rest of her family cope with fear and loss, this story serves as a reminder of the importance of timely intervention during mental health crises and domestic violence. Colin's life may go on, but the cost of these tragedies will forever be an indelible reminder that neglect and inaction can lead to irreversible, tragic outcomes. Sarah grew up in Florida in a family with 7 children. She dedicated her life to teaching elementary school and, inspired by her upbringing, wanted to build a strong family of her own. Sarah was naturally sociable and cheerful. In 1981, she met her first husband on a beach in Atlanta, and they decided to move to Georgia together. He owned a fitness club, and Sarah worked as an aerobics instructor at his center. Unfortunately, their relationship faced challenges due to his infidelity, which led Sarah to file for divorce. Although Sarah's first marriage was unsuccessful, she still hopes and is determined to find a partner who shares her values about life and family. At the age of 31, in 1984, she saw Fred Tokars, a prosecutor, discussing a high-profile case on TV. At that time, Sarah was thriving as a marketing director, and she was so taken by his interview that she felt he was the one for her. Confidently, Sarah reached out to Fred, and they quickly clicked, becoming inseparable. Fred was captivated by Sarah's beauty and charm, and she soon wanted to start a family with him. They discovered many similarities between themselves, and Sarah felt that he embodied her father's qualities and her aspirations. Fred often described himself as a protector against evil, making life feel calm and secure. They married a year after they met, and shortly thereafter, Sarah discovered she was pregnant. Their first son, Ricky, was born, and Sarah initially continued working before becoming a full-time homemaker. 2 years later, their second son, Mike, was born. To accommodate their growing family, they purchased a large home in an upscale neighborhood. Fred established his own law practice and began teaching accounting and tax law at a law school. At this point, their sons Ricky and Mike were 4 and 6 years old. At first glance, the Tokars family appeared to be a typical, quiet household, until an incident unfolded in 1992. Sarah, a 39-year-old housewife, was actively involved in her children's education and attended church every Sunday. In November 1992, Sarah took her sons to visit family for Thanksgiving while her husband, Fred, had to work. They traveled to Bradenton, Florida, stopping in Tampa to pick Fred up from the airport, as he was scheduled to join them for a family gathering that weekend. Unfortunately, their return home took a tragic turn. On the evening of November 29, 1992, a man answered a knock at his door to find 2 young boys covered in something red. When they explained that their mother had been attacked, he found it hard to believe them. The older boy, 6-year-old Ricky, recounted the terrible events to the man and later to the police who arrived on the scene. The boys, Ricky and Mike, who are 4, had just come home with Sarah after a holiday visit. As they entered their dark house, they encountered an unfamiliar man with a weapon. He ordered them to return to the car and forced Sarah to drive, while the boys sat in the back and he sat in the front passenger seat. He threatened them and demanded that they leave town. Frightened, Sarah drove where the criminal directed, pleading with him to let her and the children go. She offered money and proposed giving him the car, but he ignored all her pleas. After they left the city, he ordered her to stop. Terrified, she refused to exit the car, and a struggle ensued during which the intruder attacked her in the head. Meanwhile, Mike had been sleeping and was unaware of the situation. The sound of the gunshot woke him, and he began to cry out of fear. According to Ricky, after attacking Sarah, the intruder simply got out of the car and left. The boys then sought help in the unfamiliar area, knocking on the door of a nearby man who called for assistance. Ricky recalled details about their mother's killer and provided a description to the investigators: a dark-skinned man in jeans, a sweatshirt, and a cap. Detectives went to the car where the crime had taken place, as described by Ricky. Unfortunately, the child's account proved accurate. The interior of the car was covered in blood, and there was vomit, belonging to the children, due to the horrific sight of their mother's murder. They were so traumatized that they vomited multiple times. However, when examining the car, no shell casings or useful evidence were found. The detectives decided to investigate the family home from which the attacker had taken Sarah and the boys. They noted that the front door to the main part of the house had been tampered with, and the security alarm was found to be off, despite signs of a break-in. However, some details didn't add up, raising suspicions that the crime scene might have been staged rather than simply motivated by burglary. Investigators quickly shifted their focus to Sarah's immediate family and proposed an initial theory. Fred Tokars, a lawyer, was suspected of being connected to his wife's murder. However, this was just one theory among many and did not yet have any supporting evidence. At the time of the incident, Fred was in Montgomery, Alabama, for a business trip. He hurried back to his hometown to be with his children and support them during this challenging time. He also agreed to talk with investigators. Initially, Fred did not raise any suspicions with the authorities. When he first heard about the incident, he was distraught, mumbling and sobbing on the phone, which made it hard for others to understand him. At the police station, he displayed similar grief, appearing visibly upset. He cooperated fully, assuring the police that he would do everything possible to help catch the culprit. He also agreed to show detectives around the house to point out any missing items or inconsistencies. The investigation led them to the basement, where Fred's home office and a safe were located. Fred reported that the safe in his home should have contained $1,000, but the money was now missing. He mentioned that only his wife, Sarah, knew the combination to the safe, which was well hidden in the house. Besides Fred and Sarah, no one else knew its location. He expressed uncertainty about whether the safe had been tampered with, speculating that Sarah might have taken the money for her own needs. Despite his willingness to help, the police found it odd that Fred seemed unaware of various details about his own house. For instance, he couldn't explain why the handle on the door between the garage and the main living areas was installed upside down. Fred justified this by saying he spent most of his time working or traveling for business, so he might not have been informed if Sarah made any changes or hired contractors. There was little concrete evidence to counter Fred's story. He appeared to be honest and cooperative, which did not raise immediate suspicions. Investigators then spoke with neighbors on the street. Several witnesses reported seeing a stranger, a black man, in the area shortly before the abduction, which aligned with the description given by 6-year-old Ricky. However, this information only confirmed what the child had said and did not lead to any new developments. The police interviewed Sarah's family, who provided important information. Sarah had been visiting her relatives when she received a call at 1:30 a.m. about a security alarm going off at her home. Another alarm went off at 7:30 a.m. After speaking with neighbors, who assured her everything appeared fine, she instructed the security company to turn off the alarm, thinking it was a malfunction. She and her children planned to leave her relative's house the next day around noon for a lengthy 9-hour drive home. Interestingly, on the same day, Fred called Sarah's father to inquire about their return. According to her father, Sarah and the children were expected home between 9 p.m. and 10 p.m. She had promised to call her parents once they arrived, but by 11 p.m., there was still no call. When the tragic news emerged, some people found Fred's reaction to be excessive and peculiar. He was constantly crying and expressing a desire to see his mother, Norma, and even after she arrived, he could not be comforted. Many felt that someone like Fred, a respected lawyer and former prosecutor, could not possibly be involved in a crime. However, Sarah's sisters told the police a different story, one that changed the positive perception of him. They described Fred as having difficulty maintaining a good relationship with Sarah. He was often absent and not a good father. According to them, Sarah raised the children mainly on her own, and the family rarely ate dinner together. Although Fred often claimed to be working late, Sarah sometimes overheard women laughing in the background during his calls, leading her to suspect he was having an affair. Sarah's sisters shared that they felt Sarah's relationship with Fred began to decline after the birth of their first child. Sarah wanted to be a stay-at-home mom, but Fred insisted she keep working to help with household finances. He only permitted her to remain at home after her workplace closed down. The sisters didn't just visit the police station to tell stories. They revealed that about 3 years before Sarah's death, she had been gathering information about Fred. She shared this information with her younger sister, focusing on his financial dealings, as she grew increasingly worried about his new clients after he switched to private law practice. Sarah began to notice that Fred's relationships with clients seemed too personal. She suspected that he could be involved in crime and might cover up activities of trafficking prohibited substances in exchange for cash. From that point on, she no longer viewed Fred as a positive influence. He appeared to align himself with crime. After she left her job, he strictly controlled their finances, giving her only $400 a week for bills, groceries, and family needs. If something broke, Sarah had to ask for extra money, which Fred often denied, leaving repairs undone. Over time, their once beautiful home began to fall into disrepair because Fred refused to spend money on maintenance. Furthermore, she is not allowed access to her bank account and must ask Fred for permission for any spending. He tracks every penny she spends. Once a fashion lover who enjoyed looking good, she can now only wear her sister's second-hand clothes. Additionally, Fred prohibited her from going to his home office in the basement. He concealed his income and insisted they were financially struggling, despite Sarah's suspicions that this wasn't true. However, he didn't restrict his own spending. When it came to visiting his family in Florida, Sarah had to plead for a long time to get money for gas or hotel stays. Sometimes, Fred would allow her to visit her family but would refuse to go with her and their children, opting to fly separately while claiming he was too busy. 3 years before her death, Sarah's sisters revealed that she started contemplating divorce. She drafted and notarized a will for her sons, canceling all previous versions. She transferred her property to her children and designated her younger sister, Karen, as their official guardian if anything happened to her. Concerned about her son's future, Sarah believed that Fred was not fit to be a father and was unsuited for family life. In the time leading up to her death, Sarah reached out to a divorce lawyer to discuss Fred's instances of physical abuse. She confided in her sisters about the worsening situation. One day, after a violent incident where Fred had beaten her, she declined to meet with the lawyer because she didn't want to be seen in public with visible bruises. Then, someone else came along, Ralph Poma, a private investigator. Sarah wanted Ralph to gather evidence against Fred to help her win her case. She believed that Fred had threatened to take custody of their children if she divorced him, and his threat seemed credible, especially given his connections to law enforcement, the prosecutor's office, and the courts. At one point, Sarah took Ralph to Fred's office and asked him to retrieve files from Fred's computer to assist her case. However, Ralph declined, stating that obtaining that information would be illegal. During his investigation, Ralph learned that Fred had been involved in a brief affair with an unidentified woman, possibly a stripper. This woman later spoke to investigators and mentioned that Fred often rambled while drunk, expressing that his wife had become a significant problem and hinting that he wanted to get her out of the way. Although he did not provide specifics, this indicates that he might have had a motive to harm his wife, Sarah. Despite these findings, there was no direct evidence linking Fred to Sarah's murder. After a second round of questioning, the police released him due to a lack of concrete proof for charges. Nonetheless, he remained a primary suspect because of his apparent motive and opportunity. His skills as a lawyer, along with a competent defense attorney, allowed him to effectively evade police questioning. More evidence was deemed necessary. Fortunately, uncovering additional information was relatively straightforward. It was discovered that shortly before Sarah's death, Fred had taken out life insurance policies on both himself and Sarah, totaling nearly $1.7 million. This detail contributed to the circumstantial evidence against him, but it still wasn't enough to definitively connect him to the crime. Furthermore, according to the main prosecution witness, Ricky, the perpetrator had dark skin, while Fred had a lighter complexion. This inconsistency raised questions, though it remained possible that Fred used a disguise or hired someone to carry out the murder and mislead investigators. Investigators decided to review Fred's bank statements and discovered that he was using an offshore bank linked to money laundering. This revelation shocked the local community, as Fred was known as a prosecutor, lawyer, and part-time city judge. No one had suspected his involvement in such serious illegal activities. Sarah had documents showing Fred's participation in various criminal offenses, including financial fraud. She intended to use this information to pursue a divorce and gain custody of their children. However, This evidence did not demonstrate that Fred was a murderer or that he had hired someone to kill his wife. Detectives then learned about Fred's new business partner, Eddie Lawrence. Eddie bought a few small properties, renovated them and rented them out for profit. Despite this, he still struggled financially and continued to borrow money. Through these transactions, Eddie became connected to Fred and incurred debt to him, drawing the attention of investigators. A few days later, a confidential informant reached out to the police and said that Eddie was looking for a hitman, specifically someone named Curtis Rower, to commit a murder. When confronted, he denied any knowledge of Curtis. Nevertheless, the informant was deemed credible, leading to Eddie's arrest on December 16, 1982, without the option for bail. Following this, investigators intensified their search for Curtis and questioned Eddie again. Eddie, however, remained uncooperative with investigators. Eventually, on December 22, officers located Curtis hiding in an abandoned house. He had a history of minor crime convictions, including car theft and robbery, and was currently on probation for a recent similar offense. Curtis spoke to investigators and admitted that he was the one who took Sarah and the children out of town. However, he stated that he couldn't bring himself to kill her. Although he was hired as a hitman, he lacked the bravery to pull the trigger, as he had never killed anyone before. His past offenses had been minor, but now he faced serious charges, including aggravated kidnapping. Curtis disclosed that he didn't stop at a random location, he stopped where Eddie was waiting for them. Sarah recognized Eddie and tried to run him over with her car but failed. After that, she pushed Ricky to the ground to protect herself. Eddie's target was not the children, it was Sarah, and he attacked her. Eddie chose not to comment on Curtis's statement. Later, several witnesses came forward, describing Eddie as an addict with significant mental health issues. They reported that he bragged about having killed a woman. After this incident, Eddie agreed to a plea bargain. He had debts to Fred, who had hired him to find a killer. Fred promised to clear Eddie's debts and give him half of Sarah's life insurance policy. Eddie claimed he tried to talk Fred out of the plan, but when Fred paid him $25,000 up front, he felt he had no choice. Eddie organized a fake trip but stated that he did not want to kill anyone himself, so he hired Curtis for $5,000. Eddie maintained that he did not wait around or take part in the crime. Following this incident, Fred held a press conference in which he stated that he was not involved in his wife's death and claimed he was being slandered. He later closed his law practice, put the family home up for sale, and rented a garbage container to dispose of everything he didn't take with him. Fred collected his belongings and moved to Palm Beach with his mother. As stipulated in her will, Sarah's children were taken care of by her younger sister. Fred visited the children 2 or 3 times a month, meeting with Sarah's family. He insisted he was not involved in her death, but no one believed him. Eddie Lawrence accepted a plea bargain and was sentenced to 12 years in prison, on the condition that he testify against Curtis and Fred. The trial for Curtis Rover began, and thanks to his lawyer's strategies, he avoided the death penalty. Instead, he received a life sentence with the possibility of early conditional release. Curtis continued to insist that Eddie was in the car with him. Detectives then decided to arrest Fred. As he was with the children at the time, investigators pretended to be journalists to coax him out of the house. During the investigation, it was discovered that Fred had attempted to end his life shortly after learning of his wife's death. He insisted that it was a coincidence and not intentional, but the police were skeptical. They understood his attempt to end his life as a sign of guilt and believed he was involved in his wife's murder. On August 20, 1993, Fred was charged with being a lawyer for a group involved in the distribution of banned substances and money laundering through the clubs he owned with Eddie Lawrence. The money from these activities was funneled into offshore bank accounts. Fred maintained his innocence, claiming he had no involvement in illegal activities or in planning his wife's murder. In 1994, Fred was convicted of financial fraud and sentenced to life in prison. His trial for Sarah's murder did not occur until 1997, when the prosecutor sought the death penalty. Although Ricky did not testify against his father, previous statements he made were introduced in court. Fred's mother, Norma, tearfully urged the judge not to impose the death penalty, arguing that it would leave Ricky and Mike without any parents. Sarah's family shared the challenges Ricky faced. He sometimes feared returning home because he worried his grandparents might be dead and a killer might be inside. To ease his fears, adults had to accompany him to show that everything was fine before he could calm down. Ricky often had trouble sleeping, waking up in distress. When discussions about his mother arose, he would shut his eyes, cry, and cover his ears, begging others to stop talking, seemingly reliving the trauma of that night. Ultimately, Fred Tokars was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, concluding the family's quest for justice. After Fred was convicted of Sarah's murder, his sons never spoke to him again. Ricky grew up and worked in a medical organization where he helped others. Fred's life ended tragically as well. In 2020, he died of natural causes in prison at the age of 67. His attorney reported that he had a neurological disease that contributed to his death. Coincidentally, Fred's 31-year-old son, Mike, also died from a similar disease that same year. Sarah Tokar's family was once warm and hopeful, but it collapsed due to a heartbreaking tragedy caused by the very person she trusted the most, her husband, Fred Tokars. Fred, a respected prosecutor and lawyer, hired a killer to end Sarah's life. This immense loss, along with the deaths of Fred and their son Mike, left Ricky as the sole survivor, bearing the burden of their shared past. This case not only shocked public opinion due to its level of brutality and surprise, but it also served as a profound warning. Sometimes, evil hides behind a facade of morality and power. It reminds us that true safety and happiness do not lie in external appearances but in honesty, respect, and genuine love within a family. Imagine sending your child to school, only to receive their lifeless body the next day. The culprit seems to be protected. This was the reality for Kendrick Johnson's family. From the discovery of his body in a gym mat to the shocking revelation of his missing organs during his exhumation, this case is as horrific as it gets. Every detail raises many unanswered questions. Kendrick Johnson was born in October 1995 to Kenneth and Jacqueline Johnson. As the youngest of his siblings, he was the heart of his family, the light that filled their home. His mother described him as the joy of their lives, a boy with an easy smile and natural charm. He was fiercely athletic, a rising star in both football and basketball. Science and math came easily to him, as he had a gift for numbers. Above all, Kendrick had big, unstoppable dreams of making it as a professional football player. However, on January 11, 2013, those dreams were silenced forever. 17-year-old Kendrick was discovered in a way no one could have imagined. His lifeless body was clamped inside a rolled-up wrestling mat in the gymnasium of Lowndes High School in Valdosta, Georgia. The Lowndes County Sheriff's Office ruled his death an accident, claiming Kendrick had fallen inside the mat while reaching for a pair of sneakers. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation conducted an autopsy and concluded that his death was due to positional asphyxia. He had suffocated while trapped upside down. But his parents, Jacqueline and Kenneth Johnson, knew better. Something was wrong. Then the horrifying details began to emerge. On January 9, 2013, the first day back at school after the Christmas break, the students of Lowndes High School settled into their routine. The school had two gymnasiums, an old one and a newer, larger one. In the dim, dusty corner of the old gym stood several large wrestling mats that were rolled tightly and stacked upright. Some students, including Kendrick, stored personal belongings inside the mats to avoid paying locker fees. However, over the break, more mats had been added, altering the arrangement. Lowndes High School followed a block schedule, meaning classes alternated on different days. On Thursday, January 10th, at exactly 1:30 p.m., grainy surveillance footage captured Kendrick walking into the old gym. However, he was never seen leaving. His next class was weightlifting, but he never arrived. Hours passed, the hallways emptied, and the school day ended. He was supposed to come home after a freshman basketball game that evening, but he never did. Calls to his phone rang endlessly into silence. As midnight approached, Jacqueline, his mother, could feel it in her bones. Something was terribly wrong. So, just like any mother would do, she reported him missing. The next morning, January 11th, Jacqueline arrived at the school, her heart pounding with dread. She pleaded with administrators, who printed missing person flyers. Time stretched unbearably thin. Then, at approximately 10:30 a.m. inside the old gym, a group of female students sat on top of the wrestling mats filling out surveys. Something caught their attention, a pair of socks barely visible, peeking out from one of the rolled-up mats. One girl laughed, thinking it was a prank, but curiosity got the better of her. She climbed onto the bleachers, peered down into the mat, and what she saw sent ice through her veins, a body. The laughter stopped, and her scream broke the stillness of the gym. A male student rushed over, his hands trembling as he tried to pull Kendrick out. The moment he touched the body, he recoiled in horror. The stench of decomposition hit like a wave. It was clear that something terrible had happened here. A teacher sprinted forward, and together they knocked the mat over. Kendrick's body slumped forward, his face unrecognizable, grotesquely swollen. The school was thrown into chaos. Administrators initiated a lockdown and directed students to the new gym, distancing them from the alarming situation in the old gym. Amid the turmoil, Jacqueline received devastating news. Her son Kendrick's body had been discovered. He had been alone for 21 hours, suffering in the darkness. However, it is clear that someone knows what truly happened. Shortly after Kendrick was discovered, authorities in Lowndes County quickly questioned every student who had been in the gym at that time. Their accounts were consistent. A video recorded the scene, capturing the disturbing stillness of the gym, blood pooling around Kendrick's head. And two shoes, one next to his feet and the other underneath him. Yet several aspects seemed strange. Kendrick's socks were partly pulled off, and his body was positioned in a way that didn't make sense. The Johnson family rejected the conclusion that their son's death was accidental and sought support from civil rights organizations. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference and the NAACP became involved. Protests took place, and Kendrick's parents were even arrested for civil disobedience outside the courthouse. The case gained significant attention, as the family believed it was a cover-up. In response to growing public pressure, the Department of Justice launched its own investigation, but that too hit dead ends. One story says that Kendrick was familiar with the old gym at Lowndes High School. Like many other students, he used the rolled-up wrestling mats for storage, hiding his pair of sneakers inside to avoid paying locker fees. This was a routine he had followed many times. On January 10, 2013, surveillance cameras recorded Kendrick walking into the gym alone. No one followed him, and no one witnessed what happened next. However, based on the physical evidence, investigators believe that Kendrick's last moments were marked by a tragic chain of errors. At 5 feet 10 inches, he reached for the mat that contained his shoes, only to find that it had been moved over the holiday break and was now stuck behind several other mats. The space was just out of reach for him. Instead of tipping the mat over, a loud action that might attract attention, he likely decided to climb inside, as he had done on previous occasions. Kendrick gripped the side of the mat with his right hand and lowered himself headfirst, reaching out with his left to grab his shoe inside. However, as he went deeper, there wasn't enough room for him to bend his elbow and pull himself back up. He began to panic as his muscles strained. Eventually, he lost his grip on the mat's edge and slid further down, becoming fully inverted. His shoulders got stuck against the walls of the mat, trapping him. The more he struggled, the harder it became to move due to gravity working against him. He tried to shift his weight and may have attempted to kick himself free, but in the process, he lost the shoes he was wearing. They fell near his feet. Blood rushed to his head, the world around him darkened, and his lungs were compressed under his own weight, leading to a drop in oxygen levels. Trapped and helpless, He suffocated in silence, alone in a gym filled, just out of reach of help. Kendrick remained in the mat unnoticed for nearly 21 hours. No one questioned his absence until his mother reported him missing. By then, it was too late. When he was discovered the next morning, rigor mortis had already set in. The cause of death was ruled as accidental positional asphyxia, a tragic mistake that became fatal. Positional asphyxia is a hidden and dangerous condition. It occurs when a person's body gets stuck in a position that makes it hard to breathe, leading to suffocation. Unlike the typical struggle associated with choking, positional asphyxia results in a slow and painful death. The victim might not realize they are in trouble until it's too late. This usually happens when someone cannot escape from a cramped space, such as being trapped between furniture, stuck in a vehicle, or, as in Kendrick's case, when the body is twisted in a way that compresses the chest or limits lung expansion, breathing becomes shallow, oxygen levels drop, and the person may lose consciousness. If help does not arrive soon enough, death is certain. Medical reports from other cases of positional asphyxia show similar patterns. Victims are often found in awkward positions, with signs of suffocation such as blood coming from the mouth and nose, skin discoloration, and fluid in the lungs. What is particularly chilling about these deaths is how easily they can be misinterpreted. In Kendrick's case, it is a fact that he was discovered upside down in a gym mat. However, his family believes the official account is flawed. Since the time of his discovery, the Johnsons have maintained that Kendrick did not climb into the mat by himself, did not fall, and did not suffocate accidentally. He was murdered. Their pursuit of the truth has uncovered a complex cover-up that, even years later, continues to obscure the reality of what happened. From the beginning, there were clear inconsistencies in the case. One major issue was the handling of the investigation. The coroner, responsible for overseeing the body and crime scene, wasn't called for almost 6 hours, which violates Georgia law. By the time he arrived, the gym was no longer secured, meaning any evidence present had likely been tampered with. When Lowndes County authorities quickly declared Kendrick's death an accident, it was surprising. The medical examiner from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation attributed the cause of death to positional asphyxia, ruling out any foul play. The placement of Kendrick's body also raised suspicions. His arms were in unnatural positions, one above his head and the other bent at his side. If he had truly been reaching for his shoes, both arms would have been pointed downwards. The way the gym mats were stacked made it nearly impossible for him to have accidentally fallen into them. Furthermore, if he had somehow climbed inside, how did his shoes end up neatly on top of his legs instead of underneath him? There were also concerning traces of blood, a streak on a nearby wall and a pool beneath his head. However, authorities never tested the blood, dismissing it as old and unrelated to the case. Additionally, there were issues concerning his organs that warranted further examination. Months later, Kendrick's parents faced the difficult decision of exhuming his body to conduct an independent autopsy, driven by their need for answers that they believed had been withheld from them. Upon examination, they discovered something horrifying: his internal organs were missing and had been replaced with newspapers. Officials later claimed this was a standard practice due to decomposition, but it only fueled the family's suspicions. While the Georgia Bureau of Investigation had previously classified Kendrick's death as an accident caused by positional asphyxia, the new autopsy suggested a much more violent cause. It indicated clear signs of blunt force trauma to the neck, suggesting that Kendrick had not simply suffocated but had been struck hard enough to cause his death. Two different autopsies led to two completely different conclusions. Which one was accurate? GBI claims organs were returned to body but discarded by funeral home due to decomposition. What was most unsettling was the delay in notifying the Johnson family about their son's death. Kendrick's body was found in the morning, but his family was informed much later. As they sought answers, law enforcement remained unresponsive, offering only vague explanations. Kendrick's parents were certain about who was responsible for their son's death. They rejected the idea that it was an accident and believed he had been murdered. They filed a lawsuit naming two brothers, Brian and Brandon Bell, who also attended Lowndes High School. Brian has a history of provoking and attacking Kendrick at school, The Johnsons claimed that one of the brothers lured Kendrick to the gym, where he was viciously attacked. They suggested that the motive was a conflict over a girl. However, the Bell family denied any wrongdoing. School records indicated that one brother was out of town the day Kendrick was last seen, while the other was in a different part of the school. Authorities considered this evidence strong enough to establish the brothers' alibis, but the Johnsons remained skeptical and believed the evidence had been tampered with to protect the Bell family. The accusations continued to escalate. Some answers might have been hidden in the surveillance footage from the cameras positioned in Lowndes High School's old gym, the location where Kendrick Johnson was found dead. However, that crucial information was missing. Forensic video analysts examined the school's surveillance videos and uncovered troubling findings. As examined the video files more closely, they uncovered increasingly troubling findings. Some recordings were corrupted and could not be played, while others were processed incorrectly, resulting in significant image loss. A total of 1 hour and 5 minutes of footage was missing from 2 cameras in the gym, including Kendrick's last moments. Additionally, 2 other cameras had an even larger amount of time missing, an alarming 2 hours and 10 minutes. Then, at exactly 1:09 p.m., the footage resumes, showing Kendrick entering the gym. However, the most essential evidence in the case is completely missing. To make matters worse, it was discovered that the timestamps on the cameras were inconsistent. The cameras within the gym seemed to be operating 10 minutes ahead of those outside, leading to a disjointed timeline that could easily be manipulated. A camera outside the gym captured something significant. During the hour of missing footage, many students entered the gym. Did they witness anything? Were they questioned, or were they involved in something that needed to be concealed? What should have been a clear and undeniable record of Kendrick's last moments had instead become an empty digital space. The situation was that law enforcement did not take control of the video system right away. Instead, they relied on the school's IT department to choose which footage to share. Unfortunately, this is precisely what occurred. A school employee, not an investigator, accessed the footage and provided it to the police 5 days after Kendrick's body was discovered. By that time, the footage could have been altered, deleted, or replaced. Somewhere within those missing minutes, corrupted files, and altered timestamps lies the truth about Kendrick's case. If that truth was recorded, someone ensured it would remain hidden from view. However, experts countered that a systemic error explained the anomaly and that the SCLC found no cover-up. There was no conclusive evidence to support the intervention. Why were so many leads overlooked? Why did the Bells seem untouchable? The Johnson family believed this was due to the father's influential connections. As the Johnsons sought answers, law enforcement insisted that Kendrick's death was an accident. When the family accused the sheriff's office and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation of mishandling the case, officials rejected their claims as unfounded. Nevertheless, unsettling information continued to emerge. A coroner's report criticized the investigation for being poorly managed and pointed out that Kendrick's body had been moved before authorities arrived. In 2015, determined to find the truth, the Johnsons filed a lawsuit against the Bell brothers and over 30 other defendants, including law enforcement officers, school officials, and medical examiners. They claimed that the Lowndes County Sheriff's Office staged the crime scene and placed Kendrick's body inside a mat to simulate an accident. However, their case struggled due to the absence of eyewitnesses, concrete evidence, and confessions. Despite this, many questions remained. Investigators stood firm, with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation dismissing any homicide claims based on a regional crime lab report that found no significant injuries on Kendrick's body. In November 2015, the Justice Department filed a motion in the civil case to intervene and stay the case. The U.S. Attorney said that allowing discovery to continue in the civil case would have a disincentive effect on the federal investigation, which had expanded to include possible obstruction and jury tampering. After the Justice Department's motion was dismissed, Johnson's parents dismissed their own wrongful death lawsuit, saying they hoped to refile after the federal investigation was concluded. They were subsequently sued for more than $850,000 in attorney's fees and $1 million in defamation damages. Johnson's family requested a second exhumation of his body and was granted permission by Valdosta city officials. On June 22, 2018, Johnson's body was exhumed. In June 2018, Kendrick Johnson's body was exhumed for a third autopsy, conducted by Dr. William R. Anderson at Forensic Dimensions in Orlando, Florida. The examination concluded that Kendrick's death resulted from non-accidental blunt force trauma to the right neck and chest, suggesting he was struck with significant force, contradicting the Georgia Bureau of Investigation's positional asphyxia ruling. The report noted hemorrhaging and soft tissue damage inconsistent with accidental suffocation, reinforcing the second autopsy's findings of murder. Despite some organs still missing, as observed in 2013, no new conclusions addressed this issue. The Johnson family views this as further evidence of foul play. On March 10, 2021, the case was officially reopened by Lowndes County Sheriff Ashley Polk. Polk offered a $500,000 reward of his own money for information leading to the conviction of whoever killed Kendrick Johnson. According to Polk, he and two other investigators studied the case for 13 months before reaching their conclusion. In January 2022, the second investigation concluded with no charges filed. Polk announced a conclusion that there was no murder, no cover-up, no conspiracy in the teenager's January 2013 death. It was simply a tragic and bizarre accident. Polk stated that he would not claim that there was anything wrong with the original investigation or that the original investigation's conclusion of an accidental death was wrong. The sheriff also stated that he was not treating the case as a homicide. He further stated that the two brothers, who were named in previous legal actions by the Johnsons, were not suspects. The Johnson family has spent nearly 10 years seeking answers, filing lawsuits, organizing protests, and highlighting the corruption they believe exists in Valdosta, Georgia. Kendrick's father, Kenneth, expressed their frustration. In their quest for truth, they have exhumed Kendrick's body twice, hoping to find new evidence. Despite spending thousands of dollars to uncover the truth, every time they make progress, the case seems to regress. Although the Justice Department initiated a federal investigation, the results were never disclosed, and the courts dismissed important lawsuits for lack of evidence. Meanwhile, the media and the community have moved on, but Kendrick's parents continue to fight, convinced that their son was murdered and that the truth is being concealed. What really happened? Was it a tragic accident or a hidden murder? To this day, no one has clear answers, neither those who have been following the case nor Kendrick Johnson's family. Years have gone by, yet the truth is still out of reach, obscured by missing video footage, inconsistent reports, and hints of a cover-up. Justice remains elusive, and the silence surrounding Kendrick's death. Will Kendrick Johnson's family ever receive the answers they seek, or will the truth remain buried forever? In February 2025, the United States Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit revived the Johnson family's legal battle by ordering a Georgia federal court to reconsider the dismissal of their 2023 lawsuit against the Lowndes County Sheriff's Office, Georgia Bureau of Investigation, and others. The district court, led by Judge Lee Martin May, had dismissed the case, arguing that entities like the Sheriff's Office and School Board were not suable and that claims against individuals lacked specificity. The appeals panel upheld May's refusal to recuse herself but ruled that the Johnsons could amend their complaint to name proper defendants, such as individual officials or districts, potentially correcting legal errors. This decision, while not guaranteeing success, offers the Johnsons a renewed chance to seek accountability for Kendrick's death, alleging a conspiracy to conceal the truth. The case now returns to the U.S. Northern District of Georgia for further review, keeping the family's pursuit of justice alive. Casey Anthony was born on March 19, 1986. The woman once branded America's Most Hated is stepping back into the spotlight. But this time, she's not in the defendant's chair. She says she's a legal advocate now, not just for others but for herself and for her daughter. This is the same woman who was accused of killing her 2-year-old daughter, Kaylee. Traces of chloroform were found in the trunk of her car. Her computer had searches that no parent should ever be making. And she didn't report her daughter missing for 31 days, over a month of silence while Kaylee vanished without a trace. And yet, the jury said not guilty. One juror admitted they couldn't rule out the possibility of an accident. They said that if they weren't sure a crime had been committed, how could they say she was guilty? 14 years later, Casey wasn't just back, she was taking control of the narrative. But before we dive into her return, let's take a step back in time to understand how this whole thing started. The voice on the line said it was an emergency. They found out that their granddaughter had been missing for a month. They said they had found their daughter's car that day, and it smelled like there had been a dead body in the car. 2-year-old Kaylee Anthony. Her own mother, Casey, hadn't reported her missing. Instead, for 31 days, Casey partied and hung out with friends. Casey got a new tattoo that read Bella Vita, beautiful life, and there were no signs of panic or desperation. At first, Casey claimed that a nanny named Zani had kidnapped her daughter. But as investigators followed the trail, they hit a dead end, because Zani didn't exist. This was just one of many lies Casey told. Casey Marie Anthony was born in Warren, Ohio. Her parents, George and Cindy Anthony, raised her in a modest middle-class home alongside her older brother. George was a former cop turned security guard, and Cindy worked as a home care nurse. On the surface, they looked like your average suburban family. But people close to Casey noticed something early on: she lied. And not just the usual kid stuff, these were lies that served no purpose. If she got caught, she'd spin a new tale. It wasn't just a habit, it was who she was. As she got older, Casey became even more secretive. In high school, she kept her personal life completely under wraps. Her parents had no clue who she was spending time with, what she was doing, or who she was dating. She was outgoing, but deeply private. She then pretended that she had graduated from high school. Her parents planned a full-on celebration, family, friends, balloons, the whole deal, only to learn at the last minute that she hadn't even earned enough credits. She kept it hidden until it was too late to fix. Rather than retaking classes, she dropped out altogether. And the lies just kept coming. She told her family she had landed a job at Universal Studios. She even claimed to work at the Hard Rock Cafe there. Every morning, she left the house for work. Every evening, she came home, chatting about fake coworkers and made-up stories from her shift. To everyone around her, she looked like a young woman getting her life together, independent, busy, and responsible. Then in 2005, a guy named Jesse Grund entered the picture. Casey fell hard and fast. From the outside, everything looked normal, maybe even hopeful. She had a boyfriend, a job, and a sense of direction. Not long after turning 19, Casey Anthony's life took a sharp turn. She found out she was pregnant. The news threw her for a loop. She wasn't sure she wanted to keep the baby. She even told her friends that adoption might be the better choice. After all, she loved her carefree lifestyle and wasn't ready to be a mom. But instead of being upfront about it, Casey kept the pregnancy a secret. It wasn't until she was 7 months along that the truth finally came out. Even then, she insisted she was still considering adoption. But her parents, Cindy and George, weren't having it. They were furious at the thought of giving up their grandchild. In their minds, this baby was family, and that was the end of the discussion. With adoption off the table, Casey was about to become a mother whether she liked it or not. On August 9, 2005, Casey gave birth to a baby girl, Kaylee Marie Anthony. From the very beginning, Kaylee was the center of the Anthony family's world, especially for Cindy. She practically stepped into the role of mother, showering her granddaughter with love and attention. But while Kaylee became the heart of the household, Casey continued building a life wrapped in more lies. For starters, she told Jesse Grund, her boyfriend at the time, that he was Kaylee's father. And Jesse, thinking the child was his, fully stepped up. He was ready to raise Kaylee like his own. That is, until a paternity test proved otherwise. The test shattered that illusion. Jesse wasn't the father. And just like that, the question of who Kaylee's dad became a mystery, and one Casey never cleared up. She told different stories at different times. In one version, the father had died in a car crash, but no such person was ever identified. Some people guessed it was an old boyfriend, while others thought it might have been someone her family didn't even know. George and Cindy never pushed too hard for answers. All that mattered to them was Kaylee. She was family, no matter where she came from. Her brother, Lee, had no idea she was expecting until just days before Kaylee was born. And they lived under the same roof. Naturally, Lee was livid. He felt completely blindsided and betrayed. The secret hurt him so much that he even refused to go to the hospital when Casey gave birth. As life with a newborn began, Casey introduced yet another curious character into the story, the nanny. She called her Zani, short for Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez. According to Casey, Zani was the ex of a guy named Jeff, an IT worker from Universal Studios. Jeff, she said, was even footing the bill for Kaylee's childcare. To George and Cindy, this setup made zero sense. Why would some random guy pay for their granddaughter's babysitter? Still, they didn't push back too hard. And weirdly enough, Kaylee had mentioned Zani and her dog a few times, which added just enough believability to keep them from digging deeper. But here's the thing, no one in the family ever met Zani. There were no visits, no phone calls, and no address. Meanwhile, Jesse Grund was still trying to make it work. Even after learning he wasn't Kaylee's father, he stayed committed. He'd bonded with the little girl and genuinely wanted to be there for her. He even proposed, and Casey said yes. For a brief moment, it looked like they might become a real family. However, by May 2006, cracks began to show. Jesse noticed Casey changing. She became distant, unreliable, and dishonest. Eventually, he couldn't ignore it any longer and ended the engagement. You'd think a broken engagement and single motherhood might slow her down, but not Casey. Instead, she dove headfirst into the party scene. While her parents stayed home caring for Kaylee, Casey was out living it up. Cindy and George took on the heavy lifting. They fed Kaylee, clothed her, and gave her a stable environment. Casey, on the other hand, seemed more interested in being young and wild than in being a mom. During one of her nights out, Casey met Tony, a young guy trying to make it as a DJ. Things moved fast. Within no time, they were dating, and she was spending most of her nights at his apartment, which he shared with a couple of roommates. Sometimes she even brought little Kaylee along. It was still her parents, Cindy and George, who were doing the heavy lifting, feeding Kaylee, bathing her, tucking her in at night. Honestly, they felt more like her real parents than Casey ever did. Then, on June 15, 2008, something exploded at home. A huge argument broke out. What exactly it was about, we'll never really know, but the very next morning, Casey left the house with Kaylee and claimed she was going on a work trip to Tampa. She packed bags like she was heading out of town, but, surprise, there was no trip. Instead, Casey spent the next several weeks partying like nothing had changed. She crashed at Tony's place, went clubbing, and drank almost nightly. Casey would dodge the question whenever Cindy called to check in. She would say that she was with the nanny, or that she was sleeping. But it wasn't long before things started to feel off. As her daughter remained missing, Casey's nightlife only ramped up. She entered a hot body contest at a club, posted party pics on MySpace, danced on bar counters, and even got a new tattoo that read Bella Vita, beautiful life. All while her 3-year-old was supposedly with a nanny no one had ever met. To make matters worse, Cindy and George had lent Casey their car. She didn't have one of her own, and they wanted to help her get to work. But one day, Casey drove to a check cashing store, ran out of gas, and instead of calling for help, she left the car there. Days passed, and the car sat abandoned in the lot until it was finally towed. When the tow yard called the registered owner, it was George Anthony who picked up. Confused and annoyed, he went to retrieve the vehicle. The second he opened the door, he was hit with a stench that turned his stomach. Even the lot attendant recoiled, saying it smelled like a dead body had been inside. Still rattled, George brought the car home. When Cindy caught a whiff, she panicked. They popped open the trunk and found a trash bag inside. But instead of inspecting it, they tossed it in the bin, sprayed the entire car with Febreze, and left the doors open to air out the smell. Cindy tried calling Casey over and over, but got no response. So she drove to Tony's apartment to confront her daughter face to face. The scene inside was jarring, prohibited substance paraphernalia scattered across the living room. Casey stuck to her story. Kaylee was with the nanny, Zani. But by now, Cindy had heard enough lies. She insisted Casey come home immediately. Casey, clearly annoyed and embarrassed to be dragged out in front of her boyfriend, finally agreed. But once they returned to the house, things hit a boiling point. Cindy picked up the phone and called 911. She told the dispatcher that her daughter had taken her car and abandoned it. But then she said something that changed everything. Her granddaughter had been missing for a month. As she waited for the officers to arrive, Cindy overheard Casey talking to her brother, Lee. Casey now claimed she had met the nanny, Zani, at a park to drop off Kaylee. Horrified by what she was hearing, Cindy picked up the phone and called 911 again, this time to report what she feared was a kidnapping. In a frantic voice, she told the dispatcher that her granddaughter had been missing for an entire month. That moment, the raw panic in Cindy's voice and the shocking details she spilled, was the first time the world would hear about the disappearance of Kaylee Anthony. When police arrived at the Anthony home, they immediately turned to Casey. She didn't hesitate. She claimed she knew exactly who had her daughter, the nanny, Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez. According to Casey, Zani had been watching Kaylee for months. She said Zani was a former co-worker from Universal Studios, part black, part Puerto Rican. And most importantly, she said Zani had taken Kaylee and vanished. Detectives asked her to take them to the last place she had seen this nanny. Casey brought them to the Sawgrass Apartments and pointed out a unit where she said Zani had lived. But when management checked the records, they found that no one had lived in that apartment since March. No sign of Zani. No proof she had ever existed. Surveillance footage didn't show Casey, Kaylee, or anyone resembling a nanny entering or exiting the building. At this point, detectives were almost certain Casey was lying. So they started digging deeper. Her so-called job at Universal Studios was another red flag. She had told her parents, her friends, and even police that she worked there. But when investigators followed up, they discovered the truth. She hadn't worked there in years. She'd been fired long ago and kept pretending. Still, they played along. They took her to Universal Studios and asked her to lead them to her office. And Casey, completely unfazed, walked straight through the employee entrance like she belonged. She waved to security, passed through the halls, and led them into the office area. For several minutes, she acted like she knew exactly what she was doing. Then she stopped, turned around, and finally admitted she didn't work there. That moment shattered what little credibility she had left. On July 16, 2008, police arrested Casey Anthony. The charges: child neglect, providing false information, and obstruction of justice. Meanwhile, Cindy sat down with detectives. She explained that when she went to pick up Casey's abandoned car from the tow yard, the smell coming from the trunk was unbearable, like something had died inside. She found a trash bag, some rotting food, and a pizza box covered in maggots. At first, she convinced herself it was just garbage gone bad. She couldn't shake the memory of her 911 call, where she had reported that the car smelled like there had been a dead body in it. Now, facing pressure, she tried to walk it back, said maybe it was just rotten pizza. But investigators weren't buying it. They brought with them hunting dogs, trained to detect the scent of human decomposition. When they reached the trunk of Casey's car, both dogs zeroed in on the same area, barking and scratching like they'd found a body. Inside, forensic experts found a small stain on the trunk liner, about the size of a toddler. And even more chilling, an extremely high level of chloroform, a chemical that can be used to knock someone unconscious. The pieces were starting to come together. But where was Kaylee? And what had really happened to her? But the horror didn't stop with the smell in the trunk or the lies about the nanny. Forensic experts found something else, something small but damning, a single strand of hair. They ran mitochondrial DNA tests, and the results narrowed it down to one of three people: Cindy, Casey, or Kaylee. This isn't just any hair. It's what's called a decomposition strip that forms when a person's body begins to decompose. The hair was long, untreated, and matched Kaylee's characteristics. Meanwhile, detectives searched the Anthony family's home computer, and what they found was jaw-dropping. Among the browser history was a chilling search for how to make chloroform. When investigators confronted Cindy about it, she threw out a strange explanation. She claimed she had been looking up chlorophyll, not chloroform, because her dogs had been eating bamboo and she wanted to know if it was toxic. Turns out, Cindy wasn't even home when the search was made. Records proved that Casey was the only person in the house at the time. She was the one who Googled it. Some believe she was in denial. But one thing's clear: Cindy was trying hard to shield Casey, even as the truth closed in. Still searching for answers, Cindy visited Casey in jail and asked her directly what Zani looked like. Casey didn't offer anything solid. Just more vague answers. By now, detectives had already figured it out: Zani the nanny didn't exist. There was a real woman named Zenaida Gonzalez, but she had no connection to Casey. They'd never met. It was all a lie. One of the lead interrogators confronted Casey with brutal honesty. He warned her that this was her only chance to come clean because once the truth came out, there'd be no second opportunity. Casey remained silent for a moment, then repeated the same story, saying that was the last time she saw Kaylee and that she had dropped her off at the apartment. But the detectives weren't convinced. One of them firmly told her she was lying again. In response, Casey insisted she would never sell her daughter, saying that if she had really wanted to get rid of Kaylee, she would have left her with her parents, moved out, or even signed over custody, but she hadn't. Despite everything, despite the lies, the smell in the trunk, the DNA evidence, the Google search, no one knew where Kaylee was. Until December 11, 2008. That morning, just under a mile from the Anthony family's home, a utility worker named Roy Kronk was doing his usual rounds when he noticed something strange in the woods. About 20 feet off the road, he saw what looked like a small skull. At first, he thought it was trash. But when he poked it with a stick, he realized it was something far more disturbing. It was the skull of a child. Roy immediately called 911. This wasn't the first time he tried to report it. He had actually contacted the police months earlier, saying the area seemed suspicious. But no one had followed up. His warning had been brushed off. This time, law enforcement took it seriously. When officers arrived, they found far more than just a skull. Scattered throughout the brush were the decomposed remains of a young child. Bones had been stuffed into a trash bag. Nearby, they found a laundry bag. But what truly struck a nerve was the baby blanket lying next to the remains. It was decorated with Winnie the Pooh and Piglet. And it matched the bedding from the Anthony household. By December 19, 2008, the devastating truth was official. DNA results confirmed that the remains found in the woods belonged to Kaylee Anthony. The little girl who had vanished in July had been just minutes from home the entire time. This reignited the investigation. With evidence in hand, detectives obtained a warrant and returned to the Anthony home. What they found added weight to the case. Inside the house, investigators found a laundry bag identical to the one discovered with Kaylee's remains. These bags were only sold in sets of 2, meaning the one found in the woods must have come from the Anthony home. Then there was the blanket. The one wrapped around Kaylee's body featured Winnie the Pooh and Piglet, just like the ones decorating her bedroom. There was no denying it now. The evidence was stacking up, and it all pointed straight to Casey. Prosecutors charged Casey Anthony with first-degree murder, aggravated child abuse, aggravated manslaughter of a child, and 4 counts of lying to law enforcement. And they weren't holding back. They announced they'd be seeking the death penalty, convinced that Casey had intentionally killed her daughter. The trial began on May 24, 2011, and by then, the entire country was watching. In his opening statement, Baez claimed Kaylee hadn't been murdered at all. Instead, he said she had drowned in the family's backyard pool on June 16, 2008. According to him, Casey panicked, and it was her father, George Anthony, who helped cover it up. But that wasn't all. Baez went even further, accusing George of intimacy by abusing Casey when she was a child. He argued that years of trauma had turned her into a compulsive liar and that lying was her defense mechanism, not a sign of guilt. His claim, Casey didn't kill her daughter, she just never learned how to deal with pain, loss, or fear in a healthy way. The prosecution told a much darker story. They argued that Casey killed Kaylee because she wanted out of motherhood. They showed photos of Casey living it up, drinking, partying, even entering a hot body contest, during the weeks her daughter was supposedly missing. Kaylee's skull had been found with duct tape on it. The prosecution said it was no accident, Kaylee had been suffocated. But here's the catch, there was no clear cause of death. One of Casey's former best friends testified that Casey never even mentioned Kaylee being missing. She acted like everything was normal, even carefree. Prosecutors also played jailhouse phone calls, cold, emotionless conversations that made Casey sound indifferent, even callous. When the closing arguments wrapped up, the prosecution urged the jury to see Casey for what she truly was, a mother who wanted her freedom more than her daughter's life. They said she was a manipulator, a habitual liar who spun stories instead of reporting her child missing. The defense fired back, pointing out that there were no fingerprints, no eyewitnesses, and no physical evidence directly tying Casey to Kaylee's death. Then came July 5, 2011. The jury had spent just 10 hours in deliberation, and as the verdict was read aloud in a crowded Orlando courtroom, the world held its breath. The jury found the defendant not guilty of aggravated child abuse, not guilty of aggravated manslaughter of a child, but guilty of providing false information to law enforcement. The verdict sent shockwaves through the nation. Some shouted in disbelief. Others sobbed in rage. Millions believed Casey had gotten away with murder. But legally, the prosecution hadn't proven how Kaylee died. And in the eyes of the law, that left room for doubt. On July 17, 2011, Casey Anthony walked out of jail a free woman, having already served her time for lying to police. The public turned on her. People screamed baby killers outside courthouses and in the streets. Despite being labeled a murderer by millions and losing her daughter under the most suspicious circumstances, Casey never once publicly broke down. There was no visible remorse. Instead, she carried on like it was just another chapter behind her. In March 2017, nearly 6 years after her acquittal, she gave her first interview to the Associated Press. She admitted to lying to the police. She acknowledged the public's hatred toward her. But the strangest part, she didn't seem to care. If anything, she looked like someone who had come to terms with being infamous and maybe even embraced it. By December 2020, she was back in the headlines again. This time, it wasn't about Kaylee. It was about business. Casey filed paperwork to launch a private investigation firm in South Florida. Then, in November 2022, she stepped back into the spotlight for a televised bombshell, Casey Anthony, Where the Truth Lies, a 3-part docuseries on Peacock. In it, she leveled shocking accusations, this time pointing the finger at her father, George Anthony. She said that the only person in the world who still mattered to her was her daughter, but she was still defending the fact that she hadn't hurt her. The headlines exploded. Casey Anthony blames her father for Kaylee's death. When approached by Inside Edition, George Anthony had little to say and muttered that he was in contact with an attorney. When asked by photographers to respond to his daughter's claims, he stayed tight-lipped. But George and Cindy Anthony didn't go completely silent. In January 2024, they appeared on an A&E true crime reality show. Both took lie detector tests while reliving Kaylee's disappearance. In one moment, George denied knowing where Kaylee was during the 6 months she was missing. In another, Cindy shocked viewers when she said she believed that Casey knew exactly what happened to their granddaughter. And just when you thought the saga might finally fade, Casey popped back up, this time on TikTok. In March 2025, she posted her first video, promoting her Substack page. She called herself a legal advocate and researcher. In the 3-minute clip, She spoke directly to viewers and said that if she was going to continue operating as a legal advocate, she needed to advocate for herself and for her daughter. Just like that, Casey Anthony was back. But not as a grieving mother. Not as someone seeking justice. As someone rebranding again, recasting herself not as the accused, but as an advocate. But through every twist and turn, one truth has never changed: a child is gone. And no one has been held responsible. Caylee Anthony's memory still lingers like a shadow over this entire case. The public hasn't forgotten. Even the jurors who found Casey not guilty weren't spared. They received so many threats that their identities remain sealed to this day. And now, as Casey lives her life, unbothered, free, and forging a new identity online, one question still echoes: will justice ever come? Philip Grandin was born in the late 1980s and grew up in Paris, Ontario, Canada. He was known for being trusting, sociable, and active, qualities that helped him stand out among his peers. He excelled academically and received a scholarship for high school in 2003. At 17, he demonstrated his leadership skills by becoming the first participant in a competition aimed at improving motivation and social interaction skills among youth. He excelled in his assignments and won second place. The following year, he graduated from high school and was honored as the best student in the district. In 2007, he enrolled in a seminary to study theology. Eventually, he became a pastor at a Baptist church, where he met a wonderful girl named Anna Carissa. Anna was born on November 10, 1981, in Pasa, Philippines, to parents Maria and Marvin, and she grew up alongside her sister, Jano. In 1994, seeking better opportunities, her parents immigrated to Canada, settling in Toronto. Anna was a hardworking student, a wonderful daughter, and a caring person. She wanted to become a professional in her field, so she found a part-time job while studying at university. In 2006, she graduated with honors, earning a bachelor's degree in humanities, biology, and archaeology. Her family described her as a beautiful person with a kind and pure heart. Anna was very spiritual, deeply believing in God and actively participating in her church community. Those around her appreciated and loved her, seeing her as a source of inspiration and positivity. Although few knew she was battling a serious liver condition, she remained determined, often smiling and never complaining. People observed that Philip and Anna shared a very deep spiritual connection. Their friendship blossomed into a romantic relationship, and they soon fell in love. Like many Christian couples, they made vows to love and remain faithful to each other in front of their faith community. Then, they moved into a small bungalow located in Scarborough, Ontario. After 3 years of marriage, they received joyful news. Anna was pregnant and excited to welcome their long-awaited child, whom she named Jelly Dean. However, their happiness took a difficult turn. In August 2011, Anna discovered that her husband Philip, who served as a church pastor, was having an affair with her friend, who was also a member of another church. Anna faced a heartbreaking revelation when she discovered that her husband, Philip, had a concerning interest in adult content. Despite her hurt, Anna, with her kind heart, chose to forgive him because of her deep love and desire to keep their family intact. To support her husband in getting back on track, she even forgave the friend with whom he had an affair. Anna reached out to their mutual friend, Pastor Stephen, to share what had happened. After learning the details, Stephen recommended that they attend couples therapy, to which Philip agreed. It seemed that Philip was making a genuine effort to fix the problem and save his marriage. However, he was not satisfied with the advice that Stephen had given him. Stephen advised Philip to take a break from church activities, as his behavior was not consistent with his role as a spiritual advisor. Stephen wondered how he could guide others when he was still grappling with his own temptations and desires. Philip felt uncomfortable with these words, but he also realized that this was the right direction for him. Ultimately, he accepted the advice and resigned from his pastorate. During their therapy sessions, it became clear that Philip had an issue with viewing adult content. Stephen observed that he struggled to control his urges. To help him address this behavior, they agreed to install a filter on his computer to block access to inappropriate websites. Stephen encouraged Philip to prioritize rebuilding his relationship with Anna, his pregnant wife. In a positive turn of events, Philip also found a new job as a nurse at a nursing home. However, an unexpected incident happened soon after. Philip continued dating his mistress and went to great lengths to avoid being caught. Their meetings often took place in a car in secluded areas of the city. Although Anna is kind, she is not naive, and she eventually discovers Philip's infidelity. During a family therapy session with Stephen in early October 2011, Anna confronted Philip, revealing that she was aware of everything. On October 14th, just a few days later, Anna visited the hospital, complaining of dizziness, fatigue, and various other symptoms. While in the emergency room, she spoke with her sister Jano, mentioning that she had informed the doctors she felt unwell after consuming a cocktail prepared by her husband, Philip. She even questioned him about the possibility of drugs being added to the drink, but he denied it. Shortly after, toxicology tests confirmed the presence of Ativan in her blood, a medication typically not prescribed to pregnant women due to the associated health risks for both mother and child. After spending a night under observation in a medical facility, her condition improved, and she was discharged. A few days later, on October 19th, emergency services received a frantic call from Philip. He told the operator that he had just returned from a run and found his pregnant wife, Anna, submerged in the bathtub and unresponsive. The operator tried to comfort him and instructed him to drain the bathtub, then to move Anna's body to a flat surface to perform emergency CPR. Philip, who is a nurse, expressed that he didn't know how to perform this technique. He also mentioned that he couldn't lift Anna out of the bathtub because she was too slippery. When advised to use a towel under her arms to help lift her, he claimed he was unable to manage that. It was puzzling that he didn't even remove the drain plug from the bathtub to let the water out. Throughout the entire conversation, the only sound was the splashing of water. When the doctors and police arrived at the house, it became clear that Philip had not made any attempt to save Anna. She was still in the bathtub full of water. She was quickly taken to the hospital, but sadly, neither she nor her child survived. Anna, who was 29 years old, died during her 20th week of pregnancy. The autopsy report later indicated that her death was due to drowning. Philip spent several hours away before returning home the next day. He then met with Stephen to discuss funeral arrangements. The funeral took place 2 weeks later at the Jarvis Baptist Church. Many parishioners, who knew Anna as a kind and generous woman, gathered to pay their respects. Even Philip's mistress showed up, provoking outrage among the attendees. Philip made no effort to ease the tension. Those aware of his infidelity criticized him for being insincere. The attendees who questioned his sincerity had valid reasons. The death of his wife and their unborn child seemed to affect him little. In the months following the tragic loss, Philip was expected to grieve. However, by January and February 2012, rumors about his questionable behavior began to circulate, and many started to speculate about the circumstances of his wife's death. During this time, investigators thoroughly examined the case and sought evidence of Philip's involvement. They eventually concluded that he had intentionally administered a toxic substance. In June, he was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. A homicide detective noted that while there wasn't definitive proof to warrant his incarceration, there was enough circumstantial evidence implicating him. Despite the serious charges, the judge ruled that he could wait for his trial at his parents' farm in Brant County. People were shocked when Philip was arrested. A neighbor named Linda expressed her disbelief to journalists, saying it was hard to believe that Philip could kill his wife. She reminisced about the happy memories from the time she lived next door and became friends with their family. According to Linda, Philip and Anna treated each other with love and care. In the summer, they would visit her, enjoying lemonade and chatting in a relaxed environment. Linda was even invited to Philip's birthday celebrations, where she met his friends and family and noticed no signs of tension in their relationship. They often joked about how their lives would change with the arrival of their baby. Linda found it incredibly difficult to accept that Philip could commit such a horrific act, as he seemed joyful with his loving wife. On that tragic night, police cars arrived at the scene. Linda reported that Philip was in shock, repeatedly mentioning that they were expecting a child. Linda struggled to accept that Philip, the man who always claimed to love Anna, could be harmful to her. This marked the beginning of a slow and painful journey toward justice. Authorities believed that Philip had not only broken his marriage vows but had also plotted to eliminate Anna and their unborn son. Prosecutors aimed to demonstrate this during his first-degree murder trial, which commenced in 2014, 2 years after the tragedy. The prosecution claimed that Philip, a nurse and former pastor, had given his wife Anna a drug that functioned as a sleeping pill. While she was incapacitated, he took her to the bathtub and drowned her. His motive was to escape the marriage so he could be with his love, Elaine Florentino. During the trial, Philip pleaded not guilty, arguing that Anna had either ended her life or died in an accident. However, the evidence against him was compelling. Dr. Irving Gora testified that since Anna began seeing him in 2002, he had never prescribed her any sleeping pills, including Ativan or benzodiazepines. He also noted that on September 28, 2011, just 2 weeks before Anna's death, Philip visited him and expressed feelings of depression related to family issues. In a candid conversation, Philip admitted that he likely wouldn't choose Anna as his wife if given a chance to decide again. Irving, the obstetrician-gynecologist, pointed out that the substance found in Anna's body aligned with the prosecution's theory that Philip was involved in her death. Toxicology reports presented during the trial confirmed that lorazepam was present in her body. Additionally, a blood test conducted a few days before Anna was hospitalized revealed troubling results. During her hospitalization for suspected poisoning, Anna expressed fears that her husband was responsible and confided her concerns to her sister. The prosecution asserted that these events foreshadowed Philip's lethal actions, claiming that 3 days later, he administered a stronger dose of the illicit substance. The prosecution believed that Philip had planned the murder at least a week in advance and presented evidence collected by experts from the police computer unit. They discovered that on October 10, 2011, someone searched on a website to see if 100 milligrams of lorazepam could be lethal. On the morning of October 14, while Anna was in the hospital emergency room, another search was conducted from Philip's device for information about escort services in Toronto at 4 a.m. approximately 4 hours after Anna made her statements. Philip was online again, this time looking for details on lorazepam to support his theory. The prosecution called Philip's former boss, Catherine Fiore, to testify about how a nurse could obtain the drug in question. Catherine, the administrator at the center where Philip worked as a nurse manager, explained that he was responsible for dispensing medications to elderly patients and monitoring the disposal of excess medications. The Toronto police reported that during their investigation of Philip's computer, they found a medication report from June 2011 that listed patients from the ONAL Center and their prescribed drugs, including lorazepam. Moreover, another piece of incriminating evidence arose during the testimony. Philip claimed that he went for a run on the evening Anna drowned and returned home at 11:45 p.m. However, the records show that the adult content filter on his computer was turned off approximately 40 minutes before he returned home, which indicates that he was lying and makes him even more suspicious. Elaine's testimony revealed that after meeting Philip, she confided in him about her issues, leading to regular communication between them. Anna, Philip's wife, was aware of this relationship. One day, she even messaged Elaine on social media to express that she knew what was happening. A particularly unsettling part of Elaine's testimony was her account of a 30-minute phone call with Philip just before he discovered Anna's body in the bathtub. She also stated that on the night of the incident, after being questioned at the police station, Philip went to see her, and they resumed their affair. Despite the evidence, the defense argued during closing statements that there was no definitive proof connecting Elaine and Philip. They proposed that Anna's choice to end her life might have stemmed from various marital issues and infidelity. After 2 days of deliberation, in January 2015, the jury declared Philip Grandine guilty of premeditated murder. In a subsequent hearing, the judge sentenced him to imprisonment, noting that his actions displayed a level of depravity unimaginable to most people. After the decision was announced, Anna's sister and mother read a statement expressing their deep grief. They described Anna as kind, generous, and conveyed how much they missed her. The pain of her untimely passing will be with them for the rest of their lives. They thanked everyone involved in the investigation and prayed for Anna's soul. Sadly, Anna's family did not find relief or solace, as Philip appealed his sentence. The Supreme Court sided with him, determining that the trial court had made an error. Consequently, the jury decided to hold a new trial, where Philip would be charged with reckless homicide. This new charge meant that the prosecution could no longer argue that Philip intended to kill his wife. As a result, he was released from prison and permitted to await his new trial. The prosecution argued that Philip killed Anna to pursue an extramarital relationship and satisfy his desire for adult content. They claimed he acted recklessly by allowing Anna to enter the bathroom, knowing she was under the influence of a substance that could lead to drowning. Meanwhile, the defense contended that Anna took lorazepam on her own and caused her death either intentionally or accidentally. In the second trial, Philip was found guilty of manslaughter and was released on bail while awaiting sentencing. During her speech, Anna's mother, Maria, expressed how her world fell apart upon hearing about her daughter's death. She stated that the murder of an innocent woman and her unborn child was not just an affront to the victims but also to God. Maria insisted on a just punishment for these terrible crimes. Anna's father, Marvin, who lives in the Philippines, revealed that Philip's actions had irrevocably changed his life. After receiving the distressing news and traveling to Canada, he fell seriously ill en route and ended up hospitalized. Marvin insisted on being discharged early so he could attend his daughter's funeral. It was later revealed that he had suffered 2 strokes in January 2020. Philip Grandine was sentenced to 15 years in prison, the same as before. The judge found that he had acted hostilely towards his wife and had given her a harmful substance to impair her ability to make decisions. The judge characterized Philip's actions as premeditated, intentional, and cruel. Surprisingly, this was not the end of the legal proceedings. Philip appealed again and was granted bail while awaiting a third trial. His lawyers presented several arguments against the conviction, claiming there was no proof that he knew his wife had taken banned substances or that she was in danger while taking a bath. They also contended that the sentence from the previous judge was excessive. Anna's family had nearly lost hope for justice. They expressed their exhaustion, noting that the man who vowed to love and cherish Anna ultimately did not keep his promise and brutally murdered her. It seemed he still failed to understand the gravity of his actions, and Anna's spirit would never find peace. In May 2002, after 10 years of struggle, Anna's loved ones finally found relief when the Ontario Supreme Court rejected the arguments made by Philip's lawyers. The judge pointed out that Philip was well aware of the risks associated with the lorazepam that Anna took that evening. Her condition before her death closely resembled that of when she was brought to the hospital, showing signs of poisoning. The judge also remarked that, given his experience as a nurse, Philip should have intervened when he learned that Anna was going to take a bath. As a qualified medical worker in a nursing home, he was likely familiar with the common side effects of the medication used there. After reviewing the evidence, Philip was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Anna's sister found comfort in the thought that the killer would face consequences. She also emphasized that the appeal process had intentionally prolonged the trial and stated that the court needed to focus on addressing domestic violence, as well as protecting women and mothers from abuse. The city of Wellington, located in the state of Ohio, is small, with a population of about 5,000 residents. It is known as a quiet and peaceful place, ideal for people seeking privacy, wanting to raise children, or simply starting anew. There are practically no attractions here, except for the picturesque landscapes. Life flows as deliberately as possible, which is, of course, beneficial for the older generation who have chosen to move away from the hustle of the city. However, young people often find little to do. As they grow up, they typically leave the parental nest to go to larger cities for education, to build careers, and to start their own lives. Subsequently, this cycle tends to repeat itself. In Wellington lived the Petrick family, Susan Petrick, her husband Mark Petrick, their two daughters, Heidi and Holly, their youngest son, Daniel. They had been married for about 23 years. Susan was born and raised in a similar town in the state of Maryland. From an early age, she dreamed of having a family but understood that she first needed to work hard to establish herself. Therefore, she studied diligently in college in Pennsylvania, where she met Mark. The two fell in love at first sight and have been inseparable since. After finishing their studies, they moved to Wellington. Upon completing her education, Susan became a nurse, a goal she had long aspired to achieve. After relocating, she quickly found a job at the Wellington Medical Center. Mark became a church minister and was appointed pastor of a local church, earning great respect throughout the area. They raised their children in a Christian environment where faith was prioritized. From a young age, their daughter, son were surrounded by love and care. At the time of these events, Daniel was just entering adolescence, which significantly impacted his relationships with loved ones. Born on August 24, 1991, he was described by family and friends as an ordinary, sociable, friendly, and welcoming teenager. Biblical scriptures were meaningful to him, thanks to the general traditions upheld in the Petrick family. He was considered an average student, neither excelling nor standing out, but was certainly no worse than his peers. He always steered clear of conflicts and was not the type to cause trouble. Even Daniel's rebellious phase was calmer than for many teenagers. He had good academic performance and big plans for the future that seemed attainable. Considering life in a small American town, where teenagers might find it boring, Daniel quickly found entertainment in computer games. After transitioning to high school, he developed a keen interest in sports and led an active lifestyle, so his new gaming passion did not raise any red flags at first. However, he became overly engrossed in them. At the age of 16, Daniel sustained a spinal injury one winter while skiing with his parents, which left him bedridden for significant stretches of time. During this period, he spent his time either watching TV or playing video games, leading to a serious addiction that developed almost by accident. Mark, his father, began to notice the high level of violence depicted in the games Daniel was playing and worried about the potential negative influence on him. By 2007, Mark had convinced himself that such games were detrimental to the younger generation, noticing Daniel's growing dependency on them. Daniel dedicated all his free time to his new passion and became anxious if he was unable to play. By that time, the gaming industry had not yet developed to the point where parents treated it with understanding. Concerns varied widely. Daniel's relatives viewed video games as evil, and Mark felt compelled to protect his son from them. Mark and Susan took total control of Daniel's entertainment, scrutinized every video game he wanted to play. As a rule, they rejected many of them due to their violence and graphic nature. For example, Daniel was prohibited from playing GTA, which he had started playing at 15. Consequently, he was forced to visit friends to secretly play games he enjoyed. In 2007, a new game called Halo 3 was gaining popularity, capturing Daniel's interest along with a group of friends. Upon its release, it quickly rose to the top of the charts. Unsurprisingly, Daniel didn't want to be left behind by his friends in the gaming world. This prompted his family to check the game, which led to their discontent. Daniel considered the level of cruelty between the parents and him excessive. The real confrontation began when Mark rejected Daniel's previous choice of game, forbidding him from playing it in their home. Once again, Daniel was forced to go to his friend's house to play. However, Mark accidentally found out what his son were doing and wanted to take control of these visits, which created more pressure on Daniel. The more resistance he encountered, the more tension built within the Petrick family. By October 2007, Daniel could not resist his craving for games despite the bans. One day, he turned to his father and asked to buy a disc so that he could have fun. His religious father refused, using the same pretext that it was too cruel and bloody a game that could harm his psyche. The dialogue escalated into a conflict. By this point, Daniel was playing at least 8 hours a day, which became one of the reasons for disagreements with the older generation. Mark, seeing his son's inappropriate behavior, once again lost his temper and issued an ultimatum, telling Daniel that he would have to move out if he did not give up playing. Daniel chose the first option and moved in with a friend for a few days. Initially, this new life felt like paradise to Daniel, but it did not last long. The teenagers played until 6 p.m., and his friend's parents grew worried, asking him to play less. They even suggested Daniel return home due to the potential disturbance to their family, as they believed Daniel had provoked their son's endless gaming. Daniel returned home, but this did not resolve the ongoing tension within the family. Mark continued to insist that they should give up video games, particularly this one. However, Daniel had no intention of listening. Soon after returning to his parents' house, he stole money, secretly escaped through the window, and bought a disc of the game Halo 3, which his father had forbidden. Daniel knew this action could cause problems but hoped he could play secretly. Naturally, Daniel was quickly caught, which was the last straw for Mark. He confiscated the game console and locked it in the family safe, keeping it in the same place as his gun and ammunition, which he had acquired long ago for self-defense in case of a robbery. The key was kept in a secret place that Daniel did not know about. In light of all this, Daniel began to exhibit real fits of hysteria. Mark expected to resolve these problems in the coming days. The situation concerning Daniel's gaming addiction had clearly gotten out of control. As a result, Mark began to consult and search for a specialist who could help with his son's addiction. Saturday, October 20th, 2007, was an ordinary day for the Petrick family. The long-awaited weekend had arrived. The family planned to go to the supermarket for shopping and then to a cafe. Mark and Susan thought this would help re-establish contact with their son. They tried to enjoy their vacation. Their eldest daughter, Heidi, was spending time with friends and her husband, promising to return home with them in the evening. The youngest daughter was studying at the university and lived separately. After dinner, Daniel's parents were sitting in the living room watching TV when he unexpectedly entered the room and stood in front of them. He appeared very excited, claimed he had a gift for them, asking them to close their eyes. In the last few days, Daniel had not communicated with them at all, so his behavior and the idea of a gift genuinely surprised Mark and Susan. They decided to play along, closed their eyes. A few seconds of anticipation passed when Mark suddenly heard a familiar metallic click. It turned out that Daniel had spent the last few days desperately trying to find the key to his father's safe, which would allow him to retrieve his favorite game. When he finally managed to do so, he discovered something even more alarming. Right in front of him lay a pistol with cartridges. Hearing that familiar metallic sound, Mark opened his eyes only to witness his wife being shot. He couldn't believe his son could do something like that. Then another shot rang out. Mark was attacked in the back of the head. Mark didn't have time to react to the noise. He was attacked immediately as his son stood behind his. Mark fell to the floor. His head went numb and he saw blood pouring from his skull. Susan had died from gunshot wounds to the head, arm, and chest. Daniel then placed the gun in his father's hand to make it look like a murder-suicide, telling him, "Hey, Dad, this is your gun. Take it." A few minutes later, Daniel's older sister, Heidi, returned home with her husband. Heidi knocked on the door, and Daniel opened it, but he looked strange, standing in the hallway and not letting anyone in. Heidi tried to understand what was wrong with Daniel. He responded that there was a conflict with their parents and that it would be better for them to leave the house to give him time to make amends. Heidi called her parents, but received no answer. Then she tried to enter the house past her brother, but he grabbed the door, began to show noticeable anger. The bullet had gotten lodged in his skull, miraculously not causing fatal injuries. While Heidi tried to find out from Daniel why he didn't want to let her into their parents' house, a sound echoed behind him. Gathering all his strength, Mark called for help. Heidi pushed her brother aside and looked into the living room, where she saw the horrifying scene. Their mother had been attacked and lay in a pool of blood, with no signs of life. Their father remained sitting on the couch, his face contorted in pain, with blood splattered across the furniture, floors, and walls. Realizing he was exposed, Daniel pulled out his father's pistol from his bosom and stepped toward Heidi. Fortunately, her husband managed to react in time, taking the weapons away from Daniel, who then decided to run away. Surprisingly, even after all these events, Daniel left his parents' house with the Halo 3 disc in his hand. Despite the chaos, Heidi remained level-headed and reacted instantly. She grabbed the phone, immediately called emergency services, reporting that her brother had opened fire on their parents. She asked them to hurry because her mother showed no signs of life and her father was still conscious but seriously injured. The ambulance and law enforcement officers arrived at the scene. They confirmed the death of Susan. Mark was still fighting for his life. Daniel was neither in the house nor around it, so they immediately started looking for him. First, Daniel went to the home of a friend in the neighborhood to play, but unfortunately, the friend was not at home. Daniel did not particularly wash away the consequences of his actions. He could not even hide, nor could he play his favorite game. He was detained around 7 p.m. when he was just wandering around the area, trying to meet with one of his friends who had a free console. When Daniel was detained, he behaved very nervously and did not cooperate with the police. Daniel insisted that he did not attack at his loved ones and began to talk about a robber, but this version did not seem plausible, especially given the testimony of his sister, who had actually caught him at the crime scene. Then, Daniel changed his story, claiming that it was his father who attacked first and that he was forced to shoot in self-defense. Daniel made an attempt to justify his terrible actions and shifted the blame for what happened onto his father. He described his father, the pastor, as a cruel tyrant who had kept all family members in fear for years. Of course, it was not difficult to check this claim, but it took additional time. Susan ended up on the forensic experts table. It turned out that she managed to dodge the first bullet fired from the revolver. It passed her by. The second bullet hit her breast, the third hit her right hand, and the last shot was fatal. She died instantly due to her injuries. The situation remained critical for Mark. Doctors did everything possible to save him, but he lost consciousness and fell into a coma right on the operating table. At the same time, Daniel was in the interrogation room, and his story was carefully checked by investigators. Experienced detectives had no trouble recognizing the lies in the words of Daniel. Soon, Daniel provided a new version of what happened. According to him, on the day of the tragedy, he was in his room while his father was walking around the apartment, loudly arguing with his wife. At some point, Daniel noticed that his father was walking quickly towards his office. After Mark left, several shots were heard. Daniel was in shock. He came out of his room and found his mother lying on the floor. He stopped and froze in shock as Mark pointed a gun at him. But according to Daniel's confession, Mark spared him at the last moment by shooting himself in the head, apparently realizing the seriousness of the crime Mark had committed. Of course, no one believed this new story either. The guy was arrested and charged with aggravated murder, attempted aggravated murder, and falsification of evidence. Mark spent 2 weeks in a coma and eventually came to his senses miraculously. He lost all bodily functions, had to learn to walk again. In addition, he did not remember anything. The bullet did not enter the brain but traveled through the cheekbone, breaking the jaw, severely injuring the scalp, but it did not touch the brain or the cervical spine. During his 2-week coma, he required 5 serious operations on his face. During this period, Mark experienced very strong post-traumatic stress disorder and even shook constantly. Nevertheless, he gradually worked towards restoring his health and usual abilities. However, Mark still has difficulties with some simple physical movements and continues to suffer emotionally. At that time, it was not the right moment to give up and sink into depression. The police were determined to achieve justice. Mark found himself in a serious emotional crisis, which only exacerbated matters, so doctors recommended they giving him a little more time. Soon, he pulled himself together and was able to communicate with detectives. Mark said that at some point, he even thought about killing his son, but as a pastor of the church, this method seemed unacceptable to him. Then, he turned to God for help, and as a result, he managed to forgive his wayward son. It took a lot of time, during which Mark quoted a phrase from the Bible, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." This became a real mantra that gradually helped him forgive Daniel for everything that had happened. The Petrick family also took a long time to reach this point, but even the sisters admitted that they did not hold a grudge against their brother. The reason for the shooting of their parents, namely the game Halo 3, sparked significant public interest, and many people condemned the cruelty in video games. Parents were worried that the same fit of cruelty could happen to their children. The possible influence of such games on teenagers seemed indisputable to some. In the end, people accused the game and the developers of being responsible for Daniel taking up arms. This caused serious public controversy. Even the preliminary hearings turned out to be very intense and emotional. By this moment, those close to Daniel had already dealt with their feelings of anger. They wanted to demonstrate acceptance of the situation and quickly put an end to the matter. In turn, Daniel showed remorse, complained that he missed his mother. Despite the fact that he cried practically throughout the entire trial, the prosecution insisted that the defendant was merely trying to deceive everyone and, in fact, did not feel any remorse. Mark was the most injured party. He had undergone several complex operations, and the consequences of the injuries he received would haunt him for the rest of his life. He had lost his wife, and at one point, he had almost lost his son. Mark visited his son every weekend while awaiting the hearings. Mark even believed that his son was experiencing strong pain, and Daniel himself repeatedly stated this, regretting that his mother could not be brought back. When it came to the hearings, Daniel unexpectedly waived his right to a jury trial. Despite his lawyer's advice, he decided to leave the decision of his fate to a single judge. He believed that this would be fair since he had become the only person responsible for his mother's fate. The state ultimately decided to try him as a minor. Thanks to this, the death penalty did not apply to him. However, Daniel risked receiving a life sentence with the possibility of parole. During the hearings, the defense tried from the very beginning to the game and the console as sources of the problems. They insisted that he had no history of violence and that his strong attachment to video games arose from the spinal injury he suffered, during which he spent a long time recovering at home. The lawyers attempted to evoke pity by citing that their client was forced to stay at home for an extended period, practically without going outside. Naturally, he had to do something. He found solace in video games, which turned out to be a real evil. However, the prosecution continued to maintain that this was an attempt to deliberately harm his loved ones in cold blood. Miraculously escaping death, his older sister could have become the third victim if her husband had not intervened, or the number of victims could have reached 4. According to the prosecution, any unintentional actions were excluded. For about a week after the murder of his mother and the wounding of his father, Daniel did not intend to call for help. They understood that Daniel wanted to stage a murder and voluntarily end one's own life. Of course, against this background, the direction of the shot was not well thought out, since Mark would not have been able to hit himself in the back of the head under any circumstances. Apparently, the criminal was going to stage a murder. He might have succeeded if his older sister had not returned home earlier than she had promised. Daniel refused to comment on his plans in court. The lawyers believed that all this was speculation and that the staging was not intentional. In 2007, the topic of video games in the context of this crime became a significant issue. The views and attitudes of people were very ambivalent regarding this type of leisure activity. The format of Halo 3 was relatively new, and the older generation knew nothing about it. As a result, there were clearly biased and overly emotional interpretations. parents feared for their children due to cases of addiction and seizures. The case of Daniel was, to a large extent, indicative and was actively used by opponents of the gaming industry. When the hearings began, the judge's opinion was unambiguous and radical. He stated that Daniel was clearly under the influence of his passions and entertainment, akin to alcohol or illegal substances, which hindered his ability to distinguish between the game and real life. Daniel took up arms, mistakenly believing that he could kill his loved ones without any consequences. They would simply come back to life in the next round. The judge insisted that video games were like hard addictives. They decomposed the soul and body of a teenager. This viewpoint resonated strongly with concerned parents, as well as with Mark. However, later, this categorical position was repeatedly criticized. Despite decades of research, there is still no scientific evidence linking video games to real-world violence. Not all killers are gamers, and not all gamers take up arms. There is no clear connection between them. It seemed to Mark's family that too much attention was being paid to the gaming industry. In June 2009, the judge sentenced Daniel Petrick to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 23 years, which is the minimum sentence. The maximum sentence he faces is life without parole, as recommended by the prosecutor. Petrick is currently serving his sentence at the Grafton Correctional Institution and will be eligible for parole in 2030. Daniel will be 40 years old by the time he is eligible for release. After what happened, Mark had a long road to recovery and was eventually able to remarry. He now remembers Susan fondly and often wonders if Daniel could have changed anything. He continues to visit Daniel regularly in prison. The tragedy of the Petrick family in Wellington, Ohio, remains a haunting reminder of how quickly personal struggles can spiral into unimaginable consequences. Daniel Petrick's actions on October 20, 2007, shattered the quiet life of a close-knit community, leaving Susan's memory cherished and Mark forever altered by physical and emotional scars. Yet, through the lens of forgiveness, Mark and Heidi chose a path of healing, even as they grappled with loss. This case challenges us to reflect on family dynamics, the complexities of addiction, and the enduring power of compassion in the face of heartbreak, urging society to seek understanding over blame in addressing such profound human conflicts. Peter Manfredonia was born in February 1997 and grew up in the Sandy Hook area of Newtown, Connecticut, USA. The town, which dates back to 1711, was a quiet place until the Sandy Hook massacre in 2012, which shocked the world. The incident at Sandy Hook Elementary School resulted in the deaths of 20 children and 2 adults. Despite the tragedy that affected the lives of those around him, Peter lived a quiet life. He is an intelligent, studious, and gentle boy who is often considered an introvert. In 2015, he graduated with honors from Newtown High School, where his mother worked as a teacher. She was very proud of her son's academic achievements and received many compliments from others. After high school, Peter enrolled at the University of Connecticut to pursue a degree in engineering. There, he studied diligently and mastered complex content. He is expected to graduate in 2020. He has planned for his future and regularly takes care of his loved ones. After the Sandy Hook incident in 2012, Peter formed a group to raise funds to support the victims and to raise awareness about similar incidents. He was active on social media, voicing his concerns about these events. Additionally, he worked as a marketing coordinator for a nonprofit organization. Through his social media efforts, Peter raised money for the Special Olympics in Connecticut and managed several online marketing campaigns in his hometown, which have helped him become more independent from his parents. Peter appeared destined for career success. He was a tall and strong young man who began his professional journey as a security guard at a local club and later worked as a doorman. In 2016, he contributed to the development of a mobile application for a store. While studying at university, Peter became a financial analyst for a company that interested him, and his colleagues recognized his achievements in this field. He intended to further his career in finance. At the same time, Peter became increasingly involved in charity work, eager to help those in need. On April 15, 2019, he shared on social media his involvement with an organization that aids victims of violence. By August 19th of that year, he had joined a foundation that supports victims in dealing with emotional challenges. He even took part in a charity triathlon to raise funds and connected with victims' families, sharing his experiences on social media. Peter was known as a motivated young man who actively contributed to society and worked hard to make a difference. However, everything changed in the spring of 2020 when it became evident that even seemingly decent people could have a dark side capable of shocking actions. On Friday, May 22, 2020, at around 9 a.m., emergency services received a call from a resident of Newtown. A woman reported that two men had been attacked on their street and were seriously injured, having lost limbs and were bleeding. One of the victims was 62-year-old Ted Demers, while his 40-year-old wife, Cindy, was the one who called for help. She informed the rescue service that her husband had seen a young neighbor acting strangely, standing still and staring intently out of their window. Ted was a caring family man who enjoyed woodworking and building furniture. He was friendly and well-liked in the community. Concerned about the young man, Ted approached him to offer assistance. The neighbor claimed he was waiting for someone to help him with his broken motorcycle, and Ted offered him a ride. There seemed to be no reason for any aggression, but suddenly, the situation turned horrific. The neighbor brandished a weapon and assaulted Ted. He then hit Ted's left arm and attacked Ted's back several times. Finally, he delivered a fatal blow to Ted's head, fracturing Ted's skull. All of this attracted the attention of not only Cindy but also another neighbor, John, an 80-year-old man who witnessed the scene through a window. John ran into the street to confront the attacker and prevent him from causing further harm to Ted. However, in his haste, he failed to consider the danger of confronting an armed and unstable individual. The attacker attacked him. Fortunately, it appears that John was not the primary target of the attacker, and he fled the scene on a red motorbike while John managed to escape. Meanwhile, Cindy called 911 and ran into the street as soon as the attacker disappeared. She held her husband, Ted, in her arms while waiting for the medics, providing support and comfort until the ambulance arrived. Despite her efforts to bandage his wounds with makeshift materials, the blood loss was too severe. Lacking professional medical skills and faced with deep lacerations, Ted tragically lost consciousness. Unfortunately, he died on the way to the hospital. Heartbroken, Cindy wanted to assist the police in capturing the criminal. She identified the assailant as Peter Manfredonia, a 23-year-old man whose behavior had troubled her in the past. Cindy admitted that she had previously encountered issues with him. She had seen him wandering aimlessly in the area, looking suspicious. Cindy had been afraid of Peter and had even attempted to obtain a court order against him shortly before the incident. She believed he was obsessively interested in samurai swords, having seen at least 2 different swords in his home. On several occasions, she noticed these swords displayed on the walls and was convinced that he was training with them. This background made the violence he exhibited even more shocking. The injuries sustained by Ted and his neighbor, John, were inflicted by a samurai sword, as evidenced by deep, forceful cuts typical of such a weapon. This suggested that Peter had at least basic experience in wielding a sword. Cindy's concerns confirmed that Peter was an extremely dangerous individual. The most unsettling aspect was the complete lack of motive for the attack. He simply assaulted Ted and John, then vanished. The search for Peter then began. Later, his bright red motorcycle was found abandoned, and he was declared a wanted man since he was not at home. On May 23, 2020, police received a report about a suspicious abandoned white pickup truck located just a few kilometers from the city. When officers arrived to investigate, they discovered that the truck had become stuck in wet grass while attempting to access Osborne Dale Park. Heavy rain in the area damaged the road, making it impassable. The license plate of the truck was traced back to Donald Hipps, who resided in the city. Realizing that something might have happened to him, the police immediately went to his home, but no one answered. The neighbors stated that they had not seen anything unusual, which prompted the officers to decide to force their way inside. As the officers moved through the corridors, they braced for a sudden attack, but everything appeared normal. The area was clean and showed no signs of struggle, although some cabinets were open, suggesting that it had been ransacked. The tenant, Donald, was found in the basement tied to a chair but unharmed. He explained that on Friday evening, May 22nd, on the same day Ted and John were attacked, he had been sitting in his living room watching a news report about a recent murder. The police were searching for a criminal who had recently surfaced in the city, warning residents to stay indoors unless absolutely necessary. Donald dozed off in his chair and was startled awake at 5:15 a.m. by a cold object pressed against the back of his head. He remained still, not turning to face the intruder. However, he caught a glimpse of the assailant through his peripheral vision and in reflections from the TV. The attacker then blindfolded him with tape. The young man appeared to be around 20 years old, wearing a black t-shirt and black sweatpants, similar to Peter's attire. Donald observed that the assailant likely discarded a pair of shoes stained with the blood of innocent victims. He also noted that the attacker had a cruel and cold expression, leading him to suspect that he was under the influence of something and not behaving normally. The criminal searched through the rooms, looking for something and rummaging through the cabinets. Eventually, he forced Donald at gunpoint into the basement, tied him to a chair, and secured him with tape. The stranger identified himself as Rick. Donald was held captive for nearly a day and attempted to communicate with his captor throughout that time. Initially, he didn't realize who Rick truly was. In desperation, he offered the criminal money, trying to bargain for his life by revealing where his savings were hidden in the house. There was a TV in the basement, and Rick was intently watching a news report. At one point, a photo of Peter appeared on the screen. Meanwhile, Donald is horrified to learn that one of the people Rick attacked has died from his injuries. Furthermore, Rick is in his house. As time passed, Donald resigned himself to his situation, choosing not to provoke Rick further. He was puzzled as to why Peter wanted to be called by a different name. Rick admitted that he had not slept in 5 days, which might have explained his erratic behavior, though he didn't reveal the cause of his insomnia. Peter confessed to attacking 2 men but expressed regret over Ted's death. Nonetheless, he had no intention of surrendering to the authorities. Instead, he planned to use Donald's car to escape. He seemed determined to reach a remote, wooded area where he could vanish. Peter assures Donald that he will not harm Donald, as long as Donald stays calm, but Donald feels helpless. After a day in captivity, Peter took the car keys and left Donald tied up to prevent the police from trailing him. He also grabbed several weapons stored in Donald's house for self-defense. Later, the white pickup truck was found stuck near a park, indicating that Peter's plan had been thwarted when the vehicle became immobilized. Recognizing that the pickup would quickly lead the police to him, he urgently needed a different car. Thus, he set out once again in search of another vehicle. Donald felt relieved when the police quickly found him because he was unable to escape on his own. He had been in the basement for several hours, where hardly anyone could hear him, putting him at risk of a painful death. This situation seemed like a cruel twist of fate orchestrated by Peter, who wanted to eliminate witnesses without committing further violent acts. As the incident unfolded, doubts arose. Eventually, the father of a murdered young man named Nicholas called the rescue service. The police arrived at the scene, hoping to gather information about the fugitive. Upon arrival, an officer met Jeffrey, a resident of the complex. Jeffrey informed the officer that a young couple lived in one of the units, Nicholas Isley and his girlfriend, Shannon Spies. It later emerged that Nicholas had been classmates with Peter. Tragically, he was found dead with a gunshot wound to the head. Nicholas's father was present but needed some time to gather himself before sharing his account. Meanwhile, Jeffrey recounted observing Nicholas and Shannon returning home the previous day from a party around 3 a.m. He noted that nothing seemed out of the ordinary as they entered their house. At around 5:30, Jeffrey heard a loud bang followed by a scream, but then everything went quiet. He assumed that Nicholas had just had a fight with Shannon or had dropped something, and he thought little of it. Jeffrey relaxed and eventually fell asleep. In reality, Peter had visited a school friend, Nicholas. Authorities later reviewed nearby CCTV footage and identified the intruder, Peter. On the morning of May 24th, at 5:45 a.m., Peter was seen on video at 6 a.m., walking back with Shannon and getting into her Volkswagen. He gestured for her to sit in the driver's seat while he took the passenger seat. By that time, the car had already left, and Shannon's whereabouts were unknown. Her family was notified and hoped she wouldn't act impulsively, as she was known to be strong-willed. They feared that Shannon might misjudge her own abilities. Meanwhile, Nicholas's father felt an unusual sense of anxiety since the morning, which he described as a parental instinct. He tried calling his son but received no answer. Similarly, Shannon's parents were also anxious about her and discovered that none of them could reach her and Nicholas since their mobile phones were turned off. Nicholas's father went to check on his son but was worried when no one answered the door. He noticed that Shannon's car was missing and, unable to reach Nicholas by phone, decided to enter the house. To his shock, the front door was unlocked and he found a disorganized scene inside. Items were scattered everywhere, including some cash, which consisted only of small bills. In the bedroom, he discovered Nicholas's body, with a knife nearby that had clearly been used in an attack. However, it was evident that Nicholas had died from a gunshot wound to the head. He immediately called the police. Later, authorities learned that Peter had stolen money from the home of Nicholas Isley and Shannon, murdered Nicholas, and forced Shannon to drive him to another city. Shannon tried to outsmart him by driving in circles on the same streets, but Peter eventually caught on to her plan and warned her not to do anything reckless. At one point, Shannon considered crashing into a tree to create an accident and escape, but Peter made it clear that any attempt to attract attention would result in her death. Shannon was held captive for 6 hours, during which Peter mostly stayed silent while she was driving. He eventually took her to a truck parking lot in New Jersey. When they stopped to refuel, he decided to abandon her and ordered an Uber taxi to leave. Thankfully, Shannon was physically unharmed, but she experienced significant psychological trauma and required extensive therapy to recover. On Sunday, May 24, 2020, around noon, she managed to call emergency services to report her stolen car and mention that someone had died. Later, her car was found along with its owner, who had gone through a terrifying experience with Peter. However, she was unsure where to continue the search for Peter. That same day, he was seen in East Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania. The Uber driver provided information to the police, stating he had dropped Peter off at Walmart, where Peter did not enter the store but headed towards nearby railroad tracks. Although the driver did not initially recognize Peter as the killer, he remained calm during the ride, which ultimately helped law enforcement with their investigation. The police were able to focus their search on a small mountain town in the Pocono State, Pennsylvania, a tourist area with many potential hiding spots. For several days, Peter remained elusive, but he was eventually located near the Maryland border, approximately 180 kilometers east of his last known whereabouts. There, he resorted to his usual tactics and stole another car. Despite police efforts to apprehend him, he managed to escape and hid in an abandoned house in a remote area. Tension escalated during his arrest because he was thought to be armed and dangerous. Fortunately, he surrendered without any confrontation. When police searched his belongings, they found a weapon that matched the one used to shoot his school friend, Nicholas. When Shannon reached the police station, she was still frightened but ready to explain what happened the night she was attacked. She and Nicholas had gone to bed, unaware that they were about to be in danger. She knew Peter because she had seen him several times during her year-long relationship with Nicholas. He was in regular contact with Nicholas. Although Nicholas seemed like a typical boyfriend, he was somewhat distant. While Shannon was asleep, Nicholas heard a noise and got up to check it out. Almost immediately, she heard sounds of a struggle, followed by a heavy thud. Out of fear, she left the bedroom and saw Peter attacking her boyfriend. Terrified, she hesitated to intervene and decided to call the police for help instead. She grabbed her phone and ran to the kitchen, but just then, she heard a gunshot. Shannon screamed loudly, hoping a neighbor would hear and come to their aid, but it was in vain. Everyone else was sleeping too deeply, and everything happened too quickly. Peter entered the kitchen and demanded that Shannon be quiet, threatening to kill her if she didn't obey. He declared that Nicholas could no longer be saved because he had shot Nicholas in the head. Without wasting any time, he took Shannon and instructed her to drive him in her car. As they traveled, he looked for a remote location in the mountains to avoid the police. They eventually stopped at a motel, where Peter cleaned himself up and changed clothes, as if he had anticipated needing to do so. Later searches of Peter's apartment uncovered unsettling details. The walls were filled with writings that revealed his struggles with mental health. He expressed his anger and fear of getting into trouble, which is typical behavior for someone facing these issues. Investigators also found notes indicating his obsession with a school shooting that occurred in his hometown in 2012, an event that likely affected him deeply. Shockingly, Peter believed that Adam Lanza, who committed the Sandy Hook shooting, simply snapped. Surprisingly, Peter expressed support for the criminal who took the lives of 26 innocent people. In recent years, he had developed a strong interest in forensics and kept up with serious crimes in the United States. He frequently mentioned John Thanos, the man who killed 3 teenagers and was the first person sentenced to death in Maryland. It appeared that he admired these violent criminals and closely followed their trials. Eventually, Peter was arrested and denied bail. Authorities had to sift through extensive information, but there was little doubt about his guilt as a budding serial killer. The lawyer explained that Peter's true intention was to end his life in front of his ex-girlfriend, whom he had been waiting for that day. However, his plans were interrupted when a neighbor approached him. The defense attorney noted that Peter had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and anxiety. At the moment the neighbor intervened, Peter was experiencing a psychotic episode and was unaware of his actions. During the trial, Peter emotionally apologized for his crimes and expressed deep regret, but his apology was not accepted by the victims and their families. Although Connecticut has abolished the death penalty, Cindy and John stated in court that they believed Peter deserved it. On April 19, 2008, Peter Manfredonia pleaded guilty to all charges as part of a plea agreement. He agreed not to seek parole and was sentenced to 55 years in prison for the murder of Nicholas Isley, plus an additional 25 years for the home invasion and kidnapping of Shannon. The traumatic incident caused significant anxiety and pain for many, with some still struggling to cope with the aftermath of the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting. For instance, Nicholas's sister was in class that day but miraculously escaped injury. She felt she had survived by chance, but now another violent act had taken her younger brother from her. It is worth mentioning that Peter's troubles are not the only problems in his family. A few months after Peter's arrest, his father, Robert Manfredonia, pleaded guilty to harassing a teenager. This incident occurred on April 10, 2020, just a month before Peter began his violent acts. Robert was forming a relationship with a woman who had a daughter. One evening, when the mother left home, the little girl was still at home. Friends came to visit Robert, and he quickly befriended them, spending the evening together while watching TV. At first glance, the gathering seemed like a typical party where people were watching TV. As midnight approached, Robert's friends began to leave, leaving him alone with his partner's underage daughter. They were sitting together on the first floor, watching TV when Robert suddenly began making inappropriate compliments and shifting the conversation to intimate topics. He began to unbutton her clothing against her will. Fearful and recognizing that the situation was escalating, the girl said she wanted to go to her friends for the night. Robert suggested she could stay in his bedroom instead, claiming he wouldn't use physical force. However, the girl was afraid that he might try again, and she felt unable to resist him. Taking the incident seriously, the girl reported it to her mother, who then informed the police. Eventually, Robert Manfredonia admitted his guilt and reached a plea deal with the prosecution. He was sentenced to 15 months in prison, followed by 5 years of probation. After serving his time, he moved to start anew, and his current situation is unknown. Peter Manfredonia remains in custody and has never provided a clear explanation for his actions. Many believe that his behavior is linked to untreated mental health issues that were previously identified. The incident we will discuss today occurred in April 2018 in the city of East Point, located on the coast of the Gulf of Mexico in Florida, USA, where there are many beaches and the architecture seems to have frozen in time. There are no high-rise buildings here, which brings to mind nostalgic thoughts. If we turn off the highway passing by the town, we can find yourself at the so-called forgotten beaches. Here it is always quiet, secluded, and calm. It's the best place for fishing. Life goes on steadily and peacefully. On April 23, 2018, a random witness contacted the police station. He was heading out with his wife to go fishing and, quite by chance, noticed something suspicious. He reported a body found abandoned on the side. When law enforcement officers arrived at the scene, they found a mutilated woman with no identification. Less than a day had passed when the police station received another call. This time, a staff at a nearby motel in East Point discovered something disturbing. This beautiful place is characterized by tranquility and a low crime rate, so the discovery of a young woman's body in terrible condition was a significant shock to the local community. She had sustained such severe injuries that the initial thought of investigators was that it had been a car accident. However, the forensic expert revealed the frightening truth: the victim had been beaten. Apparently, she was abused for hours, and likely tortured, before she died. At this stage, the main task was to identify the body. Detectives began checking to see if the motel room and the unidentified victim were related, and they were right. The motel room looked no less horrific. As soon as the detectives entered, they saw a bed covered in large bloodstains. They had clearly tried to clean the room, as there was a strong smell of cleaning products inside. The criminal wanted to remove their traces. Thanks to the administrator, they managed to learn that some of the last guests included a young woman named Aileen Seiden, 31. Unfortunately, after seeing the photo of the disfigured victim, the administrator was unsure if it was her. When forensic experts conducted an inspection of room 15 using lumino, they discovered that the scene of the massacre was even bloodier than it initially appeared. Some bloodstains had been washed off with detergents. Under the luminol, splashes were everywhere, even on the ceiling, indicating a very high degree of cruelty. A large number of traces were found not only in the bedroom but also in the bathroom. Judging by the police report, the bloodiest part of the attack took place right on the floor. Here, they also found a potential murder weapon: a metal curtain rod. This allowed them to connect the body to the motel room, since on the rod they also found strange circular marks and a palm print, along with blood that could have belonged to the victim. In addition to the characteristic marks from the rod, which had been used to stab the body like a spear, there were many other injuries and bruises. Eventually, the victim was identified as Aileen Seiden. Later analysis confirmed that the blood on the metal bar belonged to her, which validated the investigators' suspicions. Her fate had been difficult from a young age. Aileen had only one relative, who is an older sister. Their mother died of cancer when the girls were young, and they were raised by their biological father. However, after 6 years, he suddenly died of a heart attack, leaving Aileen, who was 15, and her sister, Franciaska, who was 22, with Franciaska becoming Aileen's legal guardian. During this difficult period, they formed a very close relationship. 7 years passed, both sisters moved to Los Angeles. Aileen has now become especially vulnerable and sensitive. She began to mourn her parents more intensely, the loss of her loved ones leaving an indelible mark on her soul. But she was always resilient. By the age of 30, Aileen moved to Florida, where she began dating a man named Zachary Abel, an old acquaintance. Before meeting Zachary, Aileen was independent, earned good money, and managed properties. At the same time, she continued to maintain a close relationship with her older sister. She knew Zachary from school and was aware of his dubious reputation. Despite this, they developed a warm connection. Years passed, and they started dating, but the situation began to change when Aileen discovered that she had a rival in Cristina Araujo, who was 8 years older than him. She was unwilling to leave Zachary. They formed a rather strange love triangle. A mutual friend, Mike Picavet, said that from the very beginning, Zachary seemed like a good person, though somewhat peculiar. He was overly extroverted, making acquaintances simply by approaching people and starting conversations on various topics. He was nice to talk to, but it all started to seem much stranger when Mike found out about the love triangle in which Zachary was involved. Zachary had been dating Christina for about 4 years. In their relationship, Christina made all the decisions and was very controlling. Christina liked to brag about her father's power, He worked in the sheriff's department, and she often boasted that she could solve any legal problems thanks to her influential father. According to Mike, they always loved wild parties and drank a lot. In 2016, Mike and Zachary meet again, but this time Christina is not present. Instead, it is Aileen. Zachary admitted that he was now in a relationship with a new woman. At this stage, many controversial issues arose, as Zachary claimed he wanted to break off his relationship with Christina, but he couldn't because they were business partners and he had become financially dependent on her. Even when he told her about the breakup, she simply refused to let him go and forced him to stay in the relationship, no matter how daunting her words sounded. Zachary repeatedly admitted this, and Mike himself heard strange statements from Christina. Zachary had tried to end the relationship for a long time, but she did not want to let him go. When persuasion stopped working, Christina began to use intimidation and gradually convinced Zachary of her father's power, making him fear her. She threatened that he could accidentally disappear, which sounded very alarming. Despite the fact that a final separation never occurred, meetings with Aileen began in 2017. Serious problems arose when Aileen unexpectedly lost her job in real estate. It seemed she was experiencing financial difficulties and began to lose control over her life. The situation turned critical when she was forced to get a job at a used car dealership, which was part of Christina and Zachary's business. According to Franciaska, from that moment, her independent life began to unravel and no longer resembled what it had been before. Aileen did not want to break up with her boyfriend, despite Franciaska's and friends' advice. She hoped everything would work out, pressured Zachary to break up with Christina once and for all, although she herself was heavily dependent on her rival. Finally, Zachary mustered up the courage, said it was time to end the relationship with Christina, and tell her about it. Contrary to expectations, an unexpected proposal emerged. Christina suggested that they could form a love triangle and live together. Aileen was against this idea from the start, but Zachary seemed to willingly accept it. Within a few weeks, he managed to convince Aileen, believing that this arrangement would give them a break and improve their financial issues before escaping from Christina. Aileen decided to give it a try, as she felt she didn't have many options. This kind of relationship felt shocking and strange. Problems began immediately. They constantly felt on edge, competing for Zachary's attention, which led to jealousy and quarrels from the first day. This tension was fueled by alcohol and resulted in fights. After every weekend, the women came away with new bruises, which they left for each other. At least that's what Zachary claimed. During this period, Aileen's best friend became her support, to whom she confided at any time. Most often, she complained about Zachary, telling her friend how she had become a victim of Christina's aggression. Despite her friend's advice and documentation of her injuries, Aileen was afraid to contact law enforcement, believing that Christina's family connections would prevent her from achieving justice and would worsen her situation. Aileen's sister was very worried when she learned about Aileen's situation, fearing that Aileen was too far away and could not be helped. Aileen and her friend desperately sought ways to break the vicious cycle. The situation reached a critical point one evening when Aileen had to be taken to the emergency room after being badly beaten. However, this time, she refused to explain what happened. As a result, her best friend took the initiative and informed the authorities that Aileen had been beaten by Zachary and Christina, but that action led to no real consequences, as Christina's father intervened. The cruel dynamic continued, with Aileen trapped in this toxic relationship, working alongside them. She felt that her job was her last chance to stay afloat, and she struggled to maintain her independence for several months. Finally, she decided that she needed to end the love triangle. She wanted to move out, but on April 7, 2018, those plans fell apart. Another violent quarrel erupted between Christina and Aileen, escalating into a physical fight. In fact, Christina sent both Aileen and Zachary an angry message, resulting in about 150 texts filled with insults. All of them were ignored. The final message was a threat that within 48 hours, she would report them to the authorities. Aileen and Zachary was then heading to Texas. Christina had finally cooled down. It seemed everything was going well until, for unknown reasons, Zachary invited her to reunite with them. As soon as they moved in together, all the old problems resurfacing with a vehemence. Regular calls from her best friend with complaints of beatings and quarrels resumed. This trip lasted 10 days, during which they decided to take a long journey, visiting many places. Eileen's older sister began to worry because, from the very beginning, she had not received any news from Aileen. When the trio was in New Orleans, Aileen was left in the motel room while Zachary and Christina went shopping. During this brief conversation, she said that she feared they were going to kill her. Shortly before this, her tormentors had taken her documents and all her money. Francesca asked her to seek help at the nearest gas station, but Aileen refused, fearing that it would provoke reprisal. While the conversation continued, Francesca tried to get more details, but unfortunately, it didn't work out because Zachary and Christina returned, forcing Aileen to end the call. They continued traveling, and at the beginning of the second week, they headed to Panama City, Florida, but accidentally missed the right exit. This mishap led them to a forgotten coast, where Eileen's body was found on April 23, 2018. They were caught on CCTV in various locations around the area. They visited a popular restaurant, played mini-golf, and enjoyed local bars, where everything looked normal and no conflicts occurred. Late in the evening, they left another bar and, on the recommendation of one of the patrons, went to the nearest motel, where they booked the last available room. On the morning of April 22nd, they made a plan to continue spending time there. They went to a liquor store, where they bought a significant amount of strong alcohol. Christina and Zachary took the largest bottle of whiskey available in the store. Later that day, Aileen called her best friend once again. She expressed the urgent need to escape from the dangerous couple, detailing how cruel and dangerous Zachary was. She described feeling like a slave in this relationship. Over the phone, they developed an escape plan. Aileen was supposed to catch a bus from their next destination. Her friend bought a ticket for her since Aileen had no money. The plan was for her to reach Miami, where she would be picked up and taken to Francesca. Unexpectedly, when Aileen was supposed to give her final answer regarding the execution of the plan, her activity on the phone abruptly stopped. The following night, Zachary and Christina arrived at Mike's place without Aileen, which made him feel confused. According to them, Aileen had simply run away, and they had no idea where she was. However, Mike suspected that Christina would not just let her go, she probably took her rival to the grave. As soon as Christina stepped away, Mike decided to check his suspicions. He decided to pressure Zachary, who eventually confessed that Aileen was dead. Zachary voluntarily recounted the details of what happened, stating that Christina had killed Aileen. He mentioned that her lifeless body was lying next to him. At first, Zachary attempted artificial respiration, but it was futile, she was already cold. Still, he decided to call for help, but Christina insisted that it was too late and that they couldn't do anything. Mike believed that his friend Zachary was innocent, but it seemed strange how fanatically he tried to protect Christina. Mike went to the police station to provide information. He told what happened. By that time, the body of an unidentified young woman had already been found on the side of the road. When her photo was shown to Mike, he identified Aileen Seiden. Now, he and the police returned to his house, where Christina and Zachary were about to leave. Fortunately, they did not have time to escape. They were arrested and taken back, where both were charged with first-degree murder. However, before they could appear before a jury, 6 painfully long years passed during which the investigation of this case was carefully conducted and compiled. Well-known global issues significantly contributed to the slowdown of the processes. All these years, Francesca eagerly awaited the end of the tragic story of her younger sister, hoping that the criminals would receive the punishment they deserved. Every bureaucratic delay caused her the deepest pain. What was most painful was the uncertainty. Zachary went to trial in January 2024, where he pleaded not guilty. Christina had entered into a plea deal 8 months earlier. She confessed to a lesser crime of second-degree murder. In fact, Zachary only confessed to participating in beating Aileen after reviewing all the evidence. The detectives were certain that Zachary played the main role in the massacre of Aileen. By entering into a plea deal, Christina became the main witness for the prosecution and testified at the trial. She was the only person who provided at least some description of what happened in room 15. According to Christina, every time Zachary drank, he became very cruel. That ill-fated day was no exception. This time, the reason for his aggression was completely unpredictable. Zachary attacked and began the execution, shouting that Aileen would always create problems. According to her confession, Christina also hit Aileen several times, but she insisted that she overdid it because of the alcohol. She tried to force herself to stop. After this incident, Christina went outside to catch her breath, and when she returned, she found Aileen lying in the bathroom. Aileen was on the floor, and the enraged Zachary was beating her with a curtain rod, kicking her even afterward. Zachary did not calm down. He dragged the victim closer to the bed, where he began to beat her so hard that the curtain rod eventually broke. Detectives found a piece of it during the initial inspection of the room, but the top was missing. Later, when it was found in Zachary's car, the metal part was covered in blood and contained Aileen's DNA, making it clear that she had been beaten with this object. Christina admitted that she could not do anything during the attack because she was afraid of Zachary. It seemed he was just warming up. He used a piece of the cane to abuse Aileen. Christina recounted this story in court, crying as she admitted that the scene of cruelty shocked her so much that she overcame her fear and stopped Zachary. By this point, Aileen was badly hurt but still alive. All three of them were very drunk, exhausted, and just fell asleep. Christina claimed that she did not think Aileen would not survive the night. Waking up the next morning, Zachary and Christina realized that Aileen was dead. Now both had to clean the scene of the crime. She was forced to help Zachary get rid of the evidence and the body, as she was afraid of becoming the next victim. Despite all these confessions and tears, many did not believe Christina, considered her the embodiment of evil and the main attacker. Zachary's lawyer insisted that Christina acted alone, claiming it was she who had tortured Aileen for hours, leading to a painful death. There were visible abrasions on Christina's hands and feet, likely obtained during the many hours of torture she inflicted on Aileen, while Zachary's hands were suspiciously clean. Furthermore, to bolster his argument, the lawyer referred to the numerous messages that Christina sent after Zachary and Aileen escaped, which contained threats, including murder. The curtain rod was damaged when it was moved during cleaning. It has Zachary's fingerprints on it. The lawyer insisted it was Christina who forced Zachary to help clean up the traces, different from Christina's testimony. Later, when the criminals took the body, loaded it into the car, and drove away, it was Christina who was caught on video. She was behind the wheel. Experts concluded that she controlled the situation, not Zachary. Zachary admitted that he had become a victim of years of manipulation. As soon as he began talking about breaking up, the pressure began. Ultimately, Zachary did not even have a motive for the murder, while Christina had plenty, including jealousy and revenge. Throughout the 6 years of waiting for the hearing, Francesca, friend, and all those who cared about this story hoped for justice. The jury deliberated for a long time and eventually reached a verdict. According to the jurors, they found Zachary Abel guilty of second-degree murder. This compromise arose because they could not decide who was exactly guilty. Even Mike spoke in Zachary's defense, believing his friend did not deserve such punishment. When the time came for the verdict, Zachary made an unexpected confession in court. He stated that the reason for Christina's aggression was a marriage proposal he made to Aileen shortly before the tragic events. During the trip, he presented her with a small toy ring that Aileen found at breakfast. Although it seemed cute, it made Christina so furious that she could no longer control herself. He sincerely believed that from that moment on, Aileen had signed her own death warrant. At the trial, Christina's father, Colonel Tony Araujo, was also present. He insisted that he never used his influence to soften Christina's sentence. Zachary Abel received life imprisonment without parole. Thanks to Christina Araujo's cooperation, she received 25 years in prison and is expected to be released in 2044 when she will be 63 years old. As for Zachary, he will most likely never get out of prison.